Hola, buenas tardes a todos amigos. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estáis? Soy Plácido Doménech, como no, y tenéis un nuevo programa, un nuevo Inside X. Esta tarde tenéis un debate ahí, a las 7:30. Pero este Inside X ha sido, bueno, en principio no lo iba a hacer, pero por petición popular en el Discord y con mensajes que me habéis enviado, pues nada, venga, vamos a verlo. Esta entrevista que no tiene mucho tiempo, de Geoffrey Hinton, pero que ha sido muy polémica, titulada El maestro o el padrino de la inteligencia artificial ya nos lo advirtió, inteligencia artificial fuera de control. Una charla de 1 hora y media donde no la he visto un poco algún titular y de qué ha hablado. Y bueno, va a hablar de todo. En 1 hora y media, normalmente las charlas de Geoffrey Hinton han sido de 10, 20, 30 minutos, pero cortitas. Aquí 1 hora y media hablando. Vamos a ver qué nos dice Geoffrey Hinton y evidentemente, pues como pone el titular, nos alertará de la inteligencia artificial, de los riesgos y, como pone en el cover de YouTube, en la portada, estos trabajos no existirán en 24 meses, en menos de 2 años. El impacto en el trabajo, algo que preocupa a muchísima gente, ¿no? Bueno, nos preocupa a todos, pero más que preocupación, lo que tenemos que tomar es conciencia para esta gran evolución, transformación, adaptación, que está claro que no a todo el mundo le apetece o le viene bien. Pero a mí es una época apasionante, llena de posibilidades y oportunidades, también de riesgos. Vamos a ver qué dice Geoffrey Hinton. Pero bueno, primero de todo, dirige y presenta a vuestro amigo Plácido Doménech Espí, 5ª temporada de un contenido de xHUB.AI, la comunidad de Inteligencia Artificial y Ciencias transversales de habla hispana. 5ª temporada, 100 y pico programas, bueno, no sé, en total casi 400 podcasts. Bueno, es una auténtica locura. Gracias por el seguimiento, gracias por la acogida, gracias por seguir siempre ahí, porque es verdad que la audiencia nunca baja. Ahora en YouTube vamos ya por 14.000 seguidores, casi hemos duplicado después del veto de Google o del shadow banning de Google. Yo tengo como meta en verano llegar a los 20.000 y quizá al final de año a los 50.000. Vamos a ver si lo podemos conseguir entre todos. Este contenido está transmitiéndose por X, por YouTube, por LinkedIn, por Twitch, por Facebook, por Rumble, por Instagram y por Kik como novedad. TikTok nos sigue bloqueando y poniendo la zancadilla, no sé por qué. Salíamos y nos escuchaba pues algunos oyentes, pues nada, no hay manera. Y eso que hemos hecho un montón de reclamaciones, pero bueno. Si os gusta el contenido que vamos a ver ahora o que vamos a realizar ahora o el contenido que hacemos en el canal, poned me gusta, compartid, comentad, suscribíos al YouTube, a la plataforma de podcast en la que estéis, preferiblemente iVoox, donde podéis apoyarnos económicamente. Lo que más me gusta, aparte de que nos apoyéis económicamente, es el que, bueno, a ver, de eso no vivimos, pero bueno, siempre se agradece ese tipo de apoyo. Es los comentarios, ¿no? El feedback que podáis trasladarnos a través del chat, a través de los programas. Sabéis que los Inside X, bueno, son moviditos porque el chat está, bueno, tremendo, ¿no? O sea, ya hay bastante gente habitual. Suele haber bastante gente también en directo, tanto por la tarde como al mediodía, cosa que me extraña. Por el mediodía pensaba que sería algo muy, muy puntual, algo muy... Bueno, al final queda aunque lo hagamos en directo, se queda guardado en YouTube y luego en podcast. Tampoco me importa la audiencia, excepto la que viene después, pero es muy interesante que haya interacción en directo y es más divertido, ¿no? Pero bueno, hay bastante gente que lo ve y que le está gustando que esto de las 3 sea en vez de una siesta o el telediario, que no sé, ¿qué queréis que os cuenten ahí? Pues nada, mejor ver xHUB.AI. Y si queréis uniros al Discord, ya vamos para 500, esperemos en verano. Yo he puesto el reto de los 700, una comunidad en Discord brutal. Por cierto, me han pasado un vídeo que me ha parecido una auténtica locura. Está en el Discord, en la parte, no me acuerdo cuál, la he publicado, pero un vídeo muy, muy chulo, muy, muy chulo. Muy de teoría de la simulación, brutal. Si queréis uniros al Discord de la comunidad de xHUB.AI, nos enviáis un mensaje directo o un correo, pero ahora, como norma habitual, y si me acuerdo, normalmente espero acordarme, os pasaré el enlace en todos los programas. Así, pues lo pongo aquí. Y quien quiera entrar, pues que entre. ¿De acuerdo? Y quien no, pues me lo pida. Si os ha gustado lo que habéis visto, pues podéis apoyarnos también económicamente, no solo suscribiéndoos al podcast de iVoox, sino también comprándonos un café en la plataforma Buy Me a Coffee o en PayPal en la cuenta de Pladoes o a través de Superchat en YouTube, donde nos podéis apoyar económicamente con todo el esfuerzo que realizamos y que necesitamos para mejorar cada día más. Intentaremos, en ello estamos. También, como siempre, vengo anunciando rápidamente el día 16 de julio en Alicante, en Punta Piedra, delante del mar, de 11 a 2, una charla que yo daré de xHUB.AI, reinventando los negocios con inteligencia. Podéis venir a ver la charla, a verme en persona, a saludarme, a haceros una foto, un autógrafo, lo que queráis. No es para tanto, pero sé que a mucha gente le hace ilusión. A mí es una cosa que me sorprende. Evidentemente yo no lo hago este tema por reconocimiento, sino por divulgación, por tomar conciencia, pensamiento crítico. Yo aprendo, traslada una exigencia y generamos un espacio, una comunidad. Pero bueno, es siempre de agradecer que la gente se te acerque, le haga ilusión verte, pues hacerse una foto para publicarlo en redes, etc. También, pues como he comentado, el día 10 no sé si me olvida. El día 16 de julio, o sea, es el de xHUB.AI con la Cámara de Comercio en Alicante. Y el 11 de julio grabaré la segunda parte, el round 2 de esa famosa charla de inversión racional que sobrepasó casi, bueno, está cerca de las 300.000 reproducciones, una de las charlas más vistas de inteligencia artificial y del canal. Sí, lo he puesto ahí, Pedro Pablo Miras, he puesto el enlace ahí, pero bueno, lo vuelvo a poner, no sé si lo has visto, y si no te lo pongo como... Oh, ok, gracias, lo has visto. Sí, hay un montón de información, es una auténtica locura. Es decir, yo no quiero atacar a nadie con lo que haga, que deje de hacer, me gusta más ser constructivo que atacar nada de lo que se pueda estar haciendo, cada uno que haga lo que pueda y lo que quiera, siempre que sea desde el respeto y la profesionalidad. Pero bueno, hay tal cantidad de información, formación, paper, es que no, bueno, yo no doy abasto, estoy 24/7 y es como decir, estoy sobrepasado de tantísimas cosas que son súper interesantes, ¿no? Pero bueno, tenéis que elegir y es verdad que ahí se publican muchísimas cosas de neurociencia. He publicado un tema de vida artificial, que voy a hacer un programa sea como sea, porque es una auténtica locura. No es de Michael Levine, es otro, lo tenéis en el Discord, ¿vale? No publico, todo lo que publico en el Discord no lo publico en redes sociales. Podría hacer alguna gente o automatización que lo hiciera en todas las redes sociales, pero bueno, entiendo que las redes sociales es una cosa y luego el Discord otra, pero bueno, vamos a intentar también llevarlo a plataforma, ya lo comentaremos para no hacerlo muy largo. Y también tenemos pendiente un programa, yo creo que haremos un programa a las 10 o a las 12, vamos a hacer un programa estos de verano, por la noche, ahí, como los locos ahí. Bueno, a las 10 tampoco es que sea de locos, pero bueno, o a las 12. Un programa de 2 o 3 horas analizando las declaraciones que hizo Philippe K. Dick en París, que son históricas y tremendas. Si no las conocéis, pues deberíais. Pero bueno, Philippe K. Dick, una figura brutal en esta era de la inteligencia artificial, etc. Y bueno, vamos a ver al amigo Geoffrey Hinton, again, juntos, hora y media. Yo no lo he visto, así que bueno, venga, vamos a ello. El Padrino, venga.
So what would you be saying to people about their career prospects in a world of superintelligence?
Trained to be a plumber.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna become a plumber.
Geoffrey Hinton is the Nobel.
Tren para ser fontanero. Bueno. Me estabais corrigiendo el otro día en el Discord. Bueno, una cosa que quiero advertiros. Los XBITE.AI vemos el vídeo, pero vamos a ir parándolo, analizándolo. Al final lo hacemos con un ánimo formativo, de analizar en diferentes canales vídeos de gente relevante. Y vamos a ir parándolo. Y vamos a ir también viendo lo que ponéis en el chat. Con lo que entonces, quien quiera ver la charla, pues que la busque, se la vea solito y ya está. Aquí es para verlo juntos, vemos lo que decís por el chat, vamos comentando. Hay veces que no digo nada 1 hora y media, o a lo mejor en otros vídeos cada 5 minutos lo corto y voy opinando. Sobre la marcha.
Nobel Prize winning pioneer whose groundbreaking work
Premio
has
Nobel.
shaped AI.
And the future of humanity.
Why do they call you the godfather of AI?
Because there weren't many people who believed that we could model AI on the brain so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or even do reasoning. And I pushed that approach for 50 years. And then Google acquired that technology, and I worked there for 10 years on something that's now used all the time in AI.
And then you left.
Yeah,
Why?
so that I could talk freely at a conference,
What did you want to talk about freely?
how dangerous AI could be. I realized that these things will one day get smarter than us, and we've never had to deal with that. And if you want to know what life's like when you're not the apex intelligence, ask a chicken. So there's risks that come from people misusing AI, and then there's risks from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
Yes, it is, but they're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things.
What about regulations?
They have some, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. Like the European regulations have a clause that says none of these apply to military uses of AI.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
One of your students left OpenAI.
Yeah, he was probably the most important person behind the development of the early versions of ChatGPT, and I think he left because he had safety concerns. We should recognize that this stuff is an existential threat, and we have to face the possibility that unless we do something soon, we're near the end.
So let's do the risks and what we end up doing in such a world. This has always blown my mind a little bit. 53% of you that listen to this show regularly haven't yet subscribed to this show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start? If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free, simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button. And my commitment to you is if you do that, then I'll do everything in my power, me and my team, to make sure that this show is better for you every single week. We'll listen to your feedback, we'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Geoffrey Hinton. They call you the godfather of AI.
Yes, they do.
Why do they call you that?
There weren't that many people who believed that we could make neural networks work, artificial neural networks. So for a long time in AI, from the 1950s onwards, there were kind of two ideas about how to do AI. One idea was that sort of core of human intelligence was reasoning. And to do reasoning, you needed to use some form of logic. And so AI had to be based around logic. And in your head, you must have something like symbolic expressions that you manipulated with rules. And that's how intelligence worked. And things like learning or reasoning by analogy, they'd all come later once we've figured out how basic reasoning works. There was a different approach, which is to say, let's model AI on the brain, because obviously the brain makes us intelligent. So simulate a network of brain cells on a computer and try and figure out how you would learn strengths of connections between brain cells so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or recognize speech or even do reasoning. I pushed that approach for like 50 years. Because so few people believed in it, there weren't many good universities that had groups that did that. So if you did that, the best young students who believed in that came and worked with you. So I was very fortunate in getting a whole lot of really good students.
Some of which have gone on to create and play an instrumental role in creating platforms like OpenAI.
Yes, so Ilya Sutskever would be a nice example, a whole bunch of them.
Why did you...
Bueno, Ilya Sutskever, uno de los hijos intelectuales si no uno de los mayores hijos intelectuales e influencias de Ilya Sutskever, de Geoffrey Hinton, ¿no? Donde coincidieron en Toronto. Y bueno, habla de, fijaos, en 1950, esa forma, los dos caminos de hacer IA, la simbólica y la conexionista, y cómo ha triunfado finalmente la conexionista, Deep Learning, simulando, bioinspirándose en el cerebro más que en la intuición de cómo funcionamos, ¿no? Sino realmente, bueno, sin entender cómo funcionamos, pero sabiendo cómo es el cerebro, intentar simular esos procesos a escala y ¡boom! Sabemos los ingredientes, pero no sabemos cómo, pero al final escalando obtenemos ese aprendizaje a gran escala, como parece ser que también así lo hace el cerebro. De ahí que tanto Hinton como Ilya Sutskever llamen a estos modelos de IA cerebros digitales.
Did you believed that modeling it off the brain was a more effective approach?
It wasn't just me believed it. Early on, von Neumann believed it, and Turing believed it. And if either of those had lived, I think AI would have had a very different history. But they both died young.
You think AI would have been here sooner?
I think the neural net approach would have been accepted much sooner if either of them had lived.
In this season of your life, what mission are you on?
My main mission now is to warn people how dangerous AI could be.
Did you know that when you became the godfather of AI?
No, not really. I was quite slow to understand some of the risks. Some of the risks were always very obvious, like people would use AI to make autonomous lethal weapons. That is, things that go around deciding by themselves who to kill. Other risks, like the idea that they would one day get smarter than us and maybe would become irrelevant, I was slow to recognize that. Other people recognized it 20 years ago. I only recognized it a few years ago that that was a real risk that might be coming quite soon.
How could you not have foreseen that if with everything you know here about cracking the ability for these computers to learn similar to how humans learn and just introducing any rate of improvement?
It's a very good question. How could you not have seen that? But remember, neural networks 20 or 30 years ago were very primitive in what they could do. They were nowhere near as good as humans at things like vision and language and speech recognition. The idea that you have to now worry about it getting smarter than people, that seems silly then.
When did that change?
It changed for the general population when ChatGPT came out. It changed for me when I realized that the kinds of digital intelligences we're making have something that makes them far superior to the kind of biological intelligence we have. If I want to share information with you, so I go off and I learn something, and I'd like to tell you what I learned. So I produce some sentences. This is a rather simplistic model, but roughly right. Your brain is trying to figure out, how can I change the strengths of connections between neurons so I might have put that word next? And so you'll do a lot of learning when a very surprising word comes, and not much learning when it's a very obvious word. If I say fish and chips, you don't do much learning when I say chips. But if I say fish and cucumber, you do a lot more learning. You wonder, why did I say cucumber? So that's roughly what's going on in your brain.
I'm predicting what's coming next.
That's how we think it's working. Nobody really knows for sure how the brain works. And nobody knows how it gets the information about whether you should increase the strength of a connection or decrease the strength of a connection. That's the crucial thing. But what we do know now from AI is that if you could get information about whether to increase or decrease the connection strength so as to do better at whatever tasks you're trying to do, then we could learn incredible things, because that's what we're doing now with artificial neural nets. It's just we don't know for real brains how they get that signal about whether to increase or decrease.
As we sit here today, what are the big concerns you have around safety of AI? If we were to list the top couple that are really front of mind and that we should be thinking about.
Can I have more than a couple?
Go ahead. I'll write them all down and we'll go through them.
Okay, first of all, I want to make a distinction between two completely different kinds of risk. There's risks that come from people misusing AI, and that's most of the risks and all of the short-term risks. And then there's risks that come from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
And I talk mainly about that second risk because lots of people say, is that a real risk? Mm-hmm. And yes, it is. Now, we don't know how much of a risk it is. We've never been in that situation before. We've never had to deal with things smarter than us. So really the thing about that existential threat is that we have no idea how to deal with it. We have no idea what it's going to look like. And anybody who tells you they know just what's going to happen and how to deal with it, they're talking nonsense. So we don't know how to estimate the probabilities it'll replace us. Some people say it's like less than 1%. My friend Yann Lecan, who was a postdoc with me, thinks, no. We're always going to be...
Compañero de piso. No, eso no lo sabía. Fueran compañeros de piso. Pues cuidado con las... con los disparos con los disparos ahí que le lanza, o las indirectas, o muchas veces las descalificaciones. Le ha llegado a llamar el francés gracioso, ¿no? Bueno, no sé si payaso en ese sentido, ¿no? Casi depende de la traducción, no sabría interpretarlo, pero bueno, sí francés gracioso, ¿no? Como queriendo decir, bueno, este no tiene ni idea, este no me llega a mí ni a la suela de los zapatos, no sabía que había sido compañero de piso.
We build these things, we're always going to be in control. We'll build them to be obedient. And other people, like Yudkowsky, say, no, these things are going to wipe us out for sure. If anybody builds
bueno, este que es el de Les Brown, el de... ¿Cómo se llama? Lo de... El basilisco de Rocco, que tenemos que hacer un programa, es un programa que se resiste, Basilisco de Rocco, que nace en Les Brown. Tela con Yudkowsky. No digo que tenga talento, conocimiento, pero me parece, bueno, auténticamente tremendo. Vi una entrevista entre Stephen Wolfram y él, de casi 3 horas, y le mete una paliza y lo deja en una auténtica evidencia, para ya no tener que verlo más. Pero bueno, es un personaje como Gary Marcus dentro de los apocalípticos y dummies de la IA.
It is going to wipe us all out. And he's confident of that. I think both of those positions are extreme. It's very hard to estimate the probabilities in between.
If you had to bet on who was right out of your two friends?
I simply don't know. So if I had to bet, I'd say the probabilities in between, and I don't know where to estimate it in between. I often say 10 to 20% chance they'll wipe us out, but that's just gut, based on the idea that we're still making them, and we're pretty ingenious. And the hope is that if enough smart people do enough research with enough resources, we'll figure out a way to build them so they'll never want to harm us.
Sometimes I think if we talk about that second path, sometimes I think about nuclear bombs and the invention of the atomic bomb and how it compares. Like, how is this different? Because the atomic bomb came along, and I imagine a lot of people at that time thought our days are numbered.
Yes, I was there. We did.
Yeah, but we're still here.
We're still here, yes. So the atomic bomb was really only good for one thing, and it was very obvious how it worked. Even if you hadn't had the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was obvious that it was a very big bomb that was very dangerous. With AI, it's good for many, many things. It's going to be magnificent in healthcare and education, and more or less any industry that needs to use its data is going to be able to use it better with AI. So we're not going to stop the development. You know, people say, well, why don't we just stop it now? We're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things. Also, we're not going to stop it because it's good for battle robots, and none of the countries that sell weapons are going to want to stop it. Like the European regulations, they have some regulations about AI, and it's good they have some regulations, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. And in particular, the European regulations have a clause in them that say none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So governments are willing to regulate companies and people, but they're not willing to regulate themselves.
It seems pretty crazy to me that
Totalmente. A ver qué decís por el chat. Hola, Plácido, ¿podrías compartirme el link de Discord? Toño González, lo he puesto, pero bueno, lo vuelvo a poner. Y ya está. Un segundo, os pongo otra vez el... Os pongo este. Vale. El Discord. Una cosa os voy a advertir. Publicaré pronto unas normas para el tema del chat. Si preguntáis o hacéis aseveraciones así como que considero que o son tonterías o no son importantes o no aportáis suficiente información, ni voy a leer lo que ponéis. Sí, pero Nexus, por mucho que Nexus dice... El problema es el mismo que con el descubrimiento y control del fuego. No es lo mismo. El fuego es una tecnología concreta que sí que puedes utilizarlo para bien o para el mal, pero estamos hablando que hemos conseguido replicar una de las cualidades inherentes o innatas o que definen al ser humano como la inteligencia. Y eso es un paradigma totalmente nuevo. Las consecuencias de su uso fueron fundamentalmente positivas, pero no tienen su misma naturaleza la potencialidad de la destrucción. Ya, pero no tiene nada que ver. Si miras el programa de ayer, el estudio del equipo del Science of Alignment de Anthropic, sobre cómo puede falsear el alineamiento un LLM, pues te darás cuenta que no tiene nada que ver. Es un reto único, nuevo. Yo no sé por qué la gente tiene la necesidad de mapear con lo conocido. No es capaz de entender que es algo nuevo. Aunque puedas hacer una analogía para tú contextualizarlo, pero nada más lejos de la realidad. Aunque sí es un nuevo fuego prometeico. Eso sí. Colkane. Eliezer tiene otro libro a punto de salir. If anyone bullshit, everyone dies. Bueno, este tío, con perdón de la palabra, está zumbado. En septiembre. Está en preventa. Bueno, pues que se lo compre su mamá y su abuela. Este tío está, fuera de sí.
That I go back and forward, but if Europe has a regulation but the rest of the world doesn't, aren't we
Yeah,
just
puts
putting
them at a
ourselves
competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
So
And we're seeing this already. I don't think people realize that when OpenAI release a new model or a new piece of software in America, they can't release it to Europe yet because of regulations here. So Sam Altman tweeted saying, our new AI agent thing is available to everybody, but it can't come to Europe yet because there's regulations.
yes,
What does that do? That gives us a productivity disadvantage?
Yes.
Disadvantage? Right.
What we need is, I mean, at this point in history, when we're about to produce things more intelligent than ourselves, what we really need is a kind of world government that works, run by intelligent, thoughtful people. And that's not what we got.
So free for all.
Well, what we've got is sort of, we've got capitalism, which is done very nicely by us.
Es decir, bueno, Hinton es muy de Foro Económico Mundial, es nuevo orden mundial, nuevo gobierno global mundial con expertos, bueno, lo que hemos vivido, ¿no? Pandemia, etcétera. Cuidado que Hinton está muy metido ahí, y si no, lo contrario es el capitalismo. Es que hay una narrativa nueva diferente, que puede ser diferente. Que eso nunca lo contemplan tampoco. Tampoco entiendo muy bien por qué.
So it's produced lots of goods and services for us. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. And that's not what you want from the people developing this stuff.
So let's do the risks then. You talked about there's human risks and then there's
So I've distinguished these two kinds of risk.
Yep.
Let's talk about all the risks from bad human actors using AI. There's cyber attacks. So between 2023 and 2024, they increased by about a factor of 1,200%. And that's probably because these large language models make it much easier to do phishing attacks.
And a phishing attack, for anyone that doesn't know, is
They send you something saying, hi, I'm your friend John, and I'm stuck in El Salvador. Could you just wire this money? That's one kind of attack.
Yeah.
But the phishing attacks are really trying to get your logon credentials.
And now with AI, they can clone my voice, my image.
They can do all that.
I'm struggling at the moment because there's a bunch of AI scams on X and also Meta. And there's one in particular on Meta, so Instagram, Facebook at the moment, which is a paid advert where they've taken my voice from the podcast. They've taken my mannerisms and they've made a new video of me encouraging people to go and take part in this crypto Ponzi scam or whatever. And we spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and end emailing Meta, telling, please take this down. They take it down, another one pops up. They take that one down, another one pops up. So it's like whack-a-mole.
Yes,
and then
very annoying.
The heartbreaking part is you get the messages from people that have fallen for the scam and they've lost £500 or $500.
And they're crossed with you because you recommended it.
And I'm sad for them.
It's very annoying.
Yeah.
I have a smaller version of that, which is some people now publish papers with me as one of the authors.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like it's in order that they can get lots of citations to themselves.
So cyber attacks, a very real threat. There's been an explosion of those.
And these already, obviously AI is very patient, so they can go through 100 million lines of code looking for known ways of attacking them. That's easy to do. But they're going to get more creative. And some people believe, some people who know a lot believe that maybe by 2030, they'll be creating new kinds of cyber attacks, which no person ever thought of. So that's very worrisome.
Because they can think for themselves and discover
They can
new
think for
ways to attack.
themselves. They can draw new conclusions from much more data than a person ever saw.
Is there anything you're doing to protect yourself from cyber attacks at all?
Yes. It's one of the few places where I changed what I do radically because I'm scared of cyber attacks. Canadian banks are extremely safe. In 2008, no Canadian banks came anywhere near going bust. So they're very safe banks because they're well regulated, fairly well regulated. Nevertheless, I think a cyber attack might be able to bring down a bank. Now, if you have all my savings are in shares in banks, held by banks. So if the bank gets attacked and it holds your shares, they're still your shares. And so I think you'd be okay unless the attacker sells the shares, because the bank can sell the shares. If the attacker sells your shares, I think you're screwed. I don't know. I mean, maybe the bank would have to try and reimburse you, but the bank's bust by now, right? So I'm worried about a Canadian bank being taken down by a cyber attack and the attacker selling shares that it holds. So I spread my money, my children's money, between 3 banks, in the belief that if a cyber attack takes down one Canadian bank, the other Canadian banks will very quickly get very careful.
And do you have a phone that's not connected to the internet? Do you have any, I'm thinking about storing data and stuff like that. Do you think it's wise to consider having cold storage?
I have a little disk drive and I back up my laptop on this hard drive. So I actually have everything on my laptop on a hard drive. At least, if the whole internet went down, I had the sense I still got it on my laptop and I still got my information. Yeah. Then the next thing is using AIs to create nasty viruses.
Okay.
And the problem with that is that just requires one crazy guy with a grudge, one guy who knows a little bit of molecular biology, knows a lot about AI, and just wants to destroy the world. You can now create new viruses relatively cheaply using AI. And you don't have to be a very skilled molecular biologist to do it. And that's very scary. So you could have a small cult, for example. And a small cult might be able to raise a few $1 million. For a few $1 million, they might be able to design a whole bunch of viruses.
Well, I'm thinking about some of our foreign adversaries doing government-funded programs. I mean, there was lots of talk around COVID and the Wuhan laboratory and what they were doing in gain-of-function research. But I'm wondering if in, a China or a Russia or an Iran or something, the government could fund a program for a small group of scientists to make a virus that they could,
I think they could, yes. Now, they'd be worried about retaliation. They'd be worried about other governments doing the same to them. Hopefully that would help keep it under control. They might also be worried about the virus spreading to their country.
Okay.
Then there's corrupting elections.
Okay.
So if you wanted to use AI to corrupt elections, a very effective thing is to be able to do targeted political advertisements where you know a lot about the person. So anybody who wanted to use AI for corrupting elections would try and get as much data as they could about everybody in the electorate. With that in mind, it's a bit worrying what Musk is doing at present in the States, going in and insisting on getting access to all these things that were very carefully siloed. The claim is it's to make things more efficient, but it's exactly what you would want if you intended to corrupt the next election.
How do you mean? Because you get all this data on the
You get all this data on people.
Yeah.
You know how much they make, where they live. You know everything about them. Once you know that, it's very easy to manipulate them.
Because you can make an AI that...
You can send messages that they'll find very convincing, telling them not to vote, for example. So I have no reason other than common sense to think this, but I wouldn't be surprised if part of the motivation of getting all this data from American government sources is to corrupt elections. Another part might be that it's very nice training data for a big model.
But he would have to be taking that data from the government and feeding it into his...
Yes. And what they've done is turned off lots of the security controls, got rid of the some of the organization to protect against that.
So that's corrupting elections.
Okay. Then there's creating these two echo chambers by organizations like YouTube and Facebook, showing people things that will make them indignant. People love to be indignant.
Indignant as in angry? Or what does indignant mean?
Feeling I'm sort of angry, but feeling righteous.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were to show me something that said, Trump did this crazy thing, here's a video of Trump doing this completely crazy thing, I would immediately click on it.
Yeah. Okay, so putting us in echo chambers and dividing us.
Yes, and that's the policy that YouTube and Facebook and others use for deciding what to show you next is causing that. If they had a policy of showing you balanced things, they wouldn't get so many clicks and they wouldn't be able to sell so many advertisements. And so it's basically the profit motive is saying, show them whatever will make them click. And what will make them click is things that are more and more extreme.
And that confirm my existing bias.
And that confirm my existing bias. So you're getting your biases confirmed all the time.
Further and further and further and further, which means you're driving away.
Which is now,
from people.
in the States, there's two communities that don't hardly talk to each other.
I'm not sure people realize that this is actually happening every time they open an app. But if you go on a TikTok or a YouTube or one of these big social networks, the algorithm, as you said, is designed to show you more of the things that you had interest in last time. So if you just play that out over 10 years, it's going to drive you further and further and further into whatever ideology or belief you have, and further away from nuance and common sense and parity, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Like, people don't know it's happening. They just open their phones and experience something and think this is the news or the experience everyone else is having.
Right. So basically, if you have a newspaper and everybody gets the same newspaper,
Yeah.
you get to see all sorts of things you weren't looking for. And you get a sense that if it's in the newspaper, it's an important thing or significant thing. But if you have your own news feed, my news feed on my iPhone, 3/4 of the stories are about AI. And I find it very hard to know if the whole world's talking about AI all the time or if it's just my news feed.
Okay, so driving me into my echo chambers, which is going to continue to divide us further and further. I'm actually noticing that the algorithms are becoming even more, what's the word? Tailored. And people might go, oh, that's great. But what it means is they're becoming even more personalized, which means that my reality is becoming even further from your reality.
Yeah, it's crazy. We don't have a shared reality anymore. I share reality with other people who watch the BBC and other BBC News and other people who read The Guardian and other people who read the New York Times. I have almost no shared reality with people who watch Fox News.
It's
worrisome.
Yeah.
Behind all this is the idea that these companies just want to make profit and they'll do whatever it takes to make more profit.
Because they have to.
They're legally obliged to do that.
So we almost can't blame the company, can we?
Capitalism's done very well for us. It's produced lots of goodies.
Yeah.
But you need to have it very well regulated. So what you really want is to have rules so that when some company is trying to make as much profit as possible, in order to make that profit, they have to do things that are good for people in general, not things that are bad for people in general. So once you get to a situation where in order to make more profit, the company starts doing things that are very bad for society, like showing you things that are more and more extreme, that's what regulations are for. So you need regulations with capitalism. Now, companies will always say regulations get in the way, make us less efficient, and that's true. The whole point of regulations is to stop them doing things to make profit that hurt society. And we need strong regulation.
Who's going to decide whether it hurts society or not? Because,
that's the job of politicians. Unfortunately, if the politicians are owned by the companies, that's not so good.
And also the politicians might not understand.
Es lo mismo, el círculo que se muerde, la pescadilla que se muerde la cola. Es que Hinton tiene una narrativa que es inconsistente totalmente. Pero al final, él al final no cree en el capitalismo ni en el estado liberal, él cree en el comunismo, en un estado nuevo donde Gobierno mundial y comunismo.
Down the technology, you've probably seen the Senate hearings where they wheel out, Mark Zuckerberg and these big tech CEOs, and it is quite embarrassing because they're asking the wrong questions.
Well, I've seen the video of the US Education Secretary talking about how they're going to get AI in the classrooms, except she thought it was called A1. She's actually there saying we're going to have all the kids interacting with A1.
There is a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down in the grades. And that's just that's a wonderful thing.
And these are the people that...
These are the people in charge.
Ultimately, the tech companies are in charge because they will outsmart.
The tech companies in the States now, at least a few weeks ago when I was there, they were running an advertisement about how it was very important not to regulate AI because it would hurt us in the competition with China.
Yeah. And that's a plausible argument, no?
Yes, it will. But you have to decide, do you want to compete with China by doing things that will do a lot of harm to your society?
No, el problema es que Estados Unidos no, ya lo vimos en la comparecencia en el Congreso, por parte de Sam Altman, el presidente de Microsoft, la presidenta de AMD y otra persona que no me acuerdo quién era. Estados Unidos no se puede permitir perder contra China. Entonces, lo de las regulaciones es un chiste comparado con el objetivo o la idea de perder contra China. Entonces, ahí Hinton es muy condescendiente, como si estuvieran jugando al parchís.
And you probably don't.
I guess they would say that it's not just China, it's Denmark and Australia and Canada and the UK.
They're not so worried about.
And Germany. But if they kneecap themselves with regulation, if they slowed themselves down, then the founders, the entrepreneurs, the investors are going to go
I think calling it kneecapping is taking a particular point of view. It's taking the point of view that regulations are sort of very harmful. What you need to do is just constrain the big companies so that in order to make profit, they have to do things that are socially useful. Like Google search is a great example. That didn't need regulation because it just made information available to people. It was great. But then if you take YouTube, which starts showing you adverts and showing you more and more extreme things, that needs regulation.
But we don't have the people to regulate it, as we've identified.
I think people know pretty well that particular problem of showing you more and more extreme things. That's a well-known problem that the politicians understand. They just need to get on and regulate it.
So that was the next point, which was that the algorithms are going to drive us further into our echo chambers.
Right.
What's next?
Lethal autonomous weapons.
Lethal autonomous weapons.
That means things that can kill you and make their own decision about whether to kill you.
Which is the great dream, I guess, of the military-industrial complex, of being able to create such weapons.
So the worst thing about them is big, powerful countries always have the ability to invade smaller, poorer countries. They're just more powerful. Mm-hmm. But if you do that using actual soldiers, you get bodies coming back in bags, and the relatives of the soldiers who were killed don't like it. So you get something like Vietnam. Mm-hmm. In the end, there's a lot of protest at home. If instead of bodies coming back in bags, it was dead robots, there'd be much less protest, and the military-industrial complex would like it much more, because robots are expensive. And suppose you had something that could get killed and was expensive to replace, that would be just great. Big countries can invade small countries much more easily because they don't have their soldiers being killed.
And the risk here is that these robots will malfunction, or they'll just be more...
No, that's even if the robots do exactly what the people who built the robots want them to do, the risk is that it's going to make big countries invade small countries more often.
More often, because they can.
Yeah, and it's not a nice thing to do.
So it brings down the friction of war.
It brings down the cost of doing an invasion.
Mm. And these machines will be smarter at warfare as well, so they'll be
Well,
better.
even when the machines aren't smarter. So the lethal autonomous weapons, they can make them now, and I think all the big defense departments are busy making them. Even if they're not smarter than people, they're still very nasty, scary things.
Because I'm thinking that, they could show just a picture, go get this guy.
Yeah.
And go take out anyone he's been texting. And this little wasp
So 2 days ago, I was visiting a friend of mine in Sussex who had a drone that cost less than £200. And the drone went up. It took a good look at me, and then it could follow me through the woods. And it was very spooky having this drone. It was about 2 meters behind me. It was looking at me. And if I moved over there, it could just track me for £200. But it was already quite spooky.
Yeah, and I imagine there's, as you say, a race going on as we speak to who can build the most complex autonomous weapons. There is a risk, I often hear, that some of these things will combine and the cyber attack will release weapons.
Sure. You can get combinatorially many risks by combining these other risks. So, I mean, for example, you could get a super intelligent AI that decides to get rid of people. And the obvious way to do that is just to make one of these nasty viruses. If you made a virus that was very contagious, very lethal, and very slow, everybody would have it before they realized what was happening. I mean, I think if a superintelligence wanted to get rid of us, it would probably go for something biological like that wouldn't affect it.
Do you not think it could just very quickly turn us against each other? For example, it could send a warning on the nuclear systems in America that there's a nuclear bomb coming from Russia, or vice versa, and one retaliates.
Yeah, I mean, my basic view is there's so many ways in which a superintelligence could get rid of us. It's not worth speculating about them.
What is to stop
what
it?
you have to do is...
Vamos a ver qué estáis comentando por el chat. Una charla interesante. La verdad es que al ser más larga, pues la verdad es que Hinton puede expresarse y explicarse mejor, ¿no? Aunque no suele profundizar, siempre deja el puntito, toca el tema, pero no llega a profundizar muchas veces. Bueno, cuando hagáis frases así tremendas, en plan, todo está perdido, realmente está ya todo preparado, si aportáis algún tipo de argumentación, mejor. Antu, un círculo vicioso. Lourdes Oñatibia, hola Plácido, voy a 2 bandas. Muy mal, esto de que vayas a 2 bandas. Me pregunto, ¿estos científicos tienen ideología, trabajan para o realmente son libres? No, bueno, en principio Hinton no trabaja para nadie, se supone, ya no, se supone. Sí que tienen ideología, Hinton tiene una ideología muy marcada a la izquierda. Y son libres, bueno, hasta cierto punto. Pero evidentemente están controlados también por su narrativa. No pueden hablar todo lo que quisieran. Conejo Blanco. Hola, teniendo en cuenta lo esclavos que somos, ya creo que por poco que nos ayudara, ya sería algo a valorar. Y si fuera verdad que podría acabar con nosotros, me consuela que los malos también caerían. Bueno, a lo mejor a los malos tendrían como una vacuna y se salvarían, no lo sabemos. Sí, lo del tema de la regulación, Lourdes Oñatibia, una nueva legislación nos pueden hacer puré. Sí, bueno, ya estamos hechos puré y no contamos para nada. Lo estamos viendo en el tema de la OTAN en España, pero bueno, en otros temas exactamente igual. Si no se regula esta realidad, ¿será por eso que nos dijo el peligro que nos acecha? Obviamente, ¿no? Bueno, es uno de ellos. No hubo un ensayo totalmente. No hubo un ensayo de ataque biológico en 2020 ya. Alberto Zenit. Hola, Alberto. Obvio. Entiendo que también la IA puede participar en su creación o diseño. No lo sabemos, evidentemente. A ver. Y la teoría del miedo, pero si fueran seres mecánicos más inteligentes, ¿podrían ser buenos o van a llevar el sesgo de sus creadores. No, bueno, pueden tener su propia visión del mundo que nosotros no vamos a controlar. En parte, ya visteis ayer el programa del alineamiento, ¿no? Y de cómo es algo que no sabemos hacer de una forma robusta. Y además, si no vamos a hacerlo ahora con modelos sencillos, imaginad cuando esto vaya evolucionando más, ¿no?
Prevent it ever wanting to. That's what we should be doing research on. There's no way we're going to prevent it from... It's smarter than us, right? There's no way we're going to prevent it getting rid of us if it wants to. We're not used to thinking about things smarter than us. If you want to know what life's like when you're not the apex intelligence, ask a chicken.
Yeah, I was thinking of my dog Pablo, my French bulldog, this morning as I left home. He has no idea where I'm going. He has no idea what I do.
Right.
I can't even talk to him.
Yeah. And the intelligence gap will be like that.
So you're telling me that if I'm Pablo, my French bulldog, I need to figure out a way to make my owner not wipe me out.
Yeah. So we have one example of that, which is mothers and babies. Evolution put a lot of work into that. Mothers are smarter than babies, but babies are in control. And they're in control because the mother just can't bear lots of hormones and things, but the mother just can't bear the sound of the baby crying.
Not all mothers.
Not all mothers. And then the baby's not in control and then bad things happen. We somehow need to figure out how to make them not want to take over. The analogy I often use is, forget about intelligence, just think about physical strength. Suppose you have a nice little tiger cub. It's sort of a bit bigger than a cat. It's really cute. It's very cuddly, very interesting to watch, except that you better be sure that when it grows up, it never wants to kill you, because if it ever wanted to kill you, you'd be dead in a few seconds.
And you're saying the AI we have now is the tiger cub?
Yep.
And it's growing up?
Yep.
So we need to train it when it's a baby.
Well, now a tiger has lots of innate stuff built in, so you know when it grows up, it's not a safe thing to have around.
But lions, people that have lions as pets,
Yes.
sometimes the lion is affectionate to its creator, but not to others.
Yes. And we don't know whether these AIs, we simply don't know whether we can make them not want to take over and not want to hurt us.
Do you think we can? Do you think it's possible to train superintelligence?
I don't think it's clear that we can. So I think it might be hopeless. But I also think we might be able to. And it'd be sort of crazy if people
Pregúntaselo a la gallina.
went extinct because we couldn't be bothered to try.
If that's even a possibility, how do you feel about your life's work? Because you were...
Yeah. It sort of takes the edge off it, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, the idea is going to be wonderful in healthcare and wonderful in education and wonderful... I mean, it's going to make call centres much more efficient, though one worries a bit about what the people who are doing that job now do. It makes me sad. I don't feel particularly guilty about developing AI like 40 years ago, because at that time we had no idea that this stuff was going to happen this fast. We thought we had plenty of time to worry about things like that. When you can't get the AI to do much and you want to get it to do a little bit more, you don't worry about this stupid little thing is going to take over from people. You just want it to be able to do a little bit more of the things people can do. It's not like I knowingly did something thinking, this might wipe us all out, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a bit sad that it's not just going to be something for good. So I feel I have a duty now to talk about the risks.
And if you could play it forward and you could go forward 30, 50 years and you found out that it led to the extinction of humanity, and if that does end up being the outcome.
Well, if you played it forward and it led to the extinction of humanity, I would use that to tell people, to tell their governments that we really have to work on how we're going to keep this stuff under control. I think we need people to tell governments that governments have to force the companies to use their resources to work on safety. And they're not doing much of that because you don't make profits that way.
One of your students we talked about earlier.
La gente aún cree que vamos a tener modelos abiertos de AGI y de superinteligencia. Qué graciosos.
Ilya?
Yep.
Ilya left OpenAI.
Yep.
And there was lots of conversation around the fact that he left because he had safety concerns.
Yes.
And he's gone on to set up a AI safety company.
Yes.
Why do you think he left?
I think he left because he had safety concerns.
Really?
I still have lunch with him from time to time.
Oh, okay.
His parents live in Toronto, and when he comes to Toronto, we have lunch together. He doesn't talk to me about what went on at OpenAI, so I have no inside information about that. But I know Ilya very well, and he is genuinely concerned with safety. So I think that's why he left.
Because he was one of the top people. I mean, he was probably the most important person behind the development of ChatGPT. The early versions like GPT-2, he was very important in the development of that. You know him personally, so you know his character.
Yes, he has a good moral compass. He's not like someone like Musk who has no moral compass.
Does Sam Altman have a good moral compass?
We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know Sam, so I don't want to comment on that.
But from-
Esto es lo que tiene Hinton, que no se moja. Hinton no se moja. Vamos a ver, pero si estás apoyando a Ilya Sutskever y se va porque es un problema de seguridad, se va porque es por culpa de Sam Altman. Y ahora le preguntan por Sam Altman y jejeje. Entonces a mí este tipo de perfiles como Geoffrey Hinton es que no me sirven, lo siento mucho. Puede ser muy buen científico, premio Nobel, haber descubierto un montón de cosas, pero en el tema de la narrativa, el liderazgo, de evolucionar o llevarnos a un estado civilizatorio diferente, escuche, como que no.
But from what you've seen, are you concerned about the actions that they've taken? Because if you know Ilya, and Ilya's a good guy and he's left.
That would give you some insight, yes. It would give you some reason to believe that there's a problem there. And if you look at Sam's statements some years ago, he sort of happily said in one interview, this stuff will probably kill us all. That's not exactly what he said, but that's what it amounted to. Now he's saying you don't need to worry too much about it. And I suspect that's not driven by seeking after the truth. That's driven by seeking after money.
Is it money or is it power?
Yeah, I shouldn't have said money. It's some combination of those, yes.
Okay, I guess money's a proxy for power, but I've got a friend who's a billionaire and he is in those circles. And when I went to his house and had lunch with him one day, he knows lots of people in AI, building the biggest AI companies in the world. And he gave me a cautionary warning across his kitchen table in London, where he gave me an insight into the private conversations these people have, not the media interviews they do where they talk about safety and all these things, but actually what some of these individuals think is going to happen.
And what do they think is going to happen?
It's not what they say publicly.
No.
You know, one person who I shouldn't name, who's leading one of the biggest AI companies in the world, he told me that he knows this person very well, and he privately thinks that we're heading towards this kind of dystopian world where we have just huge amounts of free time, we don't work anymore, and this person doesn't really give a fuck about the harm that it's going to have on the world. And this person, who I'm referring to, is building one of the biggest AI companies in the world. And I then watch this person's interviews online.
Trying to figure out which of three people it is.
Yeah, well, it's one of those three people.
Okay.
And I watch this person's interviews online and I reflect on the conversation that my billionaire friend had with me, who knows him. And I go, fucking hell, this guy's lying publicly. Like, he's not telling the truth to the world. And that's haunted me a little bit. It's part of the reason I have so many conversations around AI on this podcast, because I'm like, I don't know if I think some of them are a little bit sadistic about power. I think they like the idea that they will change the world, that they will be the one that fundamentally shifts the world.
I think Musk is clearly like that, right?
Yo creo que no.
He's such a complex character. I don't really know how to place Musk.
Mira, Elon Musk tiene una narrativa en ese sentido valiente, que yo creo que más está cerca de lo que está comentando es Sam Altman, totalmente.
He's done some really good things, like pushing electric cars. That was a really good thing to do.
Yeah.
Some of the things he said about self-driving were a bit exaggerated, but that was a really useful thing he did. Giving the Ukrainians communication during the war with Russia.
Starlink,
That was a really good thing he did. There's a bunch of things like that. Mm-hmm. But he's also done some very bad things.
So coming back to this point of...
¿Qué cosas malas ha hecho? No las ha dicho. Solo ha dicho buenas. ¿Y las malas?
The possibility of destruction and the motives of these big companies. Are you at all hopeful that anything can be done to slow down the pace and acceleration of AI?
Okay, there's two issues. One is, can you slow it down?
Yeah.
And the other is, can you make it so of it, it will be safe in the end. It won't wipe us all out. I don't believe we're going to slow it down.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't believe we're going to slow it down is because there's competition between countries and competition between companies within a country, and all of that is making it go faster and faster. And if the US slowed it down, China wouldn't slow it down.
Does Ilya think it's possible to make AI safe?
I think he does. He won't tell me what his secret source is. I'm not sure how many people know what his secret source is. I think a lot of the investors don't know what his secret source is, but they've given him billions of dollars anyway because they have so much faith in Ilya, which isn't foolish. I mean, he was very important in AlexNet, which got object recognition working well. He was the main force behind the things like GPT-2, which then led to ChatGPT. So I think having a lot of faith in Ilya is a very reasonable decision.
There's something quite haunting about the guy that made and was the main force behind GPT-2, which led rise to this whole revolution, left the company because of safety reasons. He knows something that I don't know about what might happen next.
Well, the company had, no, I don't know the precise details, but I'm fairly sure the company had indicated that it would use a significant fraction of its resources of the compute time for doing safety research. And then it reduced that fraction. I think that's one of the things that happened.
Yeah, that was reported publicly.
Yes.
Yeah. We'd gotten to the autonomous weapons part of the risk framework.
Right. So the next one is joblessness.
Yeah.
In the past, new technologies have come in which didn't lead to joblessness. New jobs were created. So the classic example people use is automatic teller machines. When automatic teller machines came in, a lot of bank tellers didn't lose their jobs. They just got to do more interesting things. But here, I think this is more like when they got machines in the Industrial Revolution, and you can't have a job digging ditches now because a machine can dig ditches much better than you can. And I think for mundane intellectual labor, AI is just going to replace everybody. Now, it may well be in the form of you have fewer people using AI assistants. So it's a combination of a person and an AI assistant are now doing the work that 10 people could do previously.
People say that it will create new jobs, though, so we'll be fine.
Yes, and that's been the case for other technologies, but this is a very different kind of technology. If it can do all mundane human intellectual labor, then what new jobs is it going to create? You'd have to be very skilled to have a job that it couldn't just do.
Totalmente.
So I don't think they're right. I think you can try and generalize from other technologies that have come in, like computers or automatic teller machines, but I think this is different.
People use this phrase,
Totalmente
they
diferente y nuevo.
say AI won't take your job, a human using AI will take your job.
Esa frase se ha comentado mucho en LinkedIn. Dicen que la IA no te quitará el trabajo, te lo quitará un humano que sabrá de inteligencia artificial. Eso es una falacia. El objetivo final es que la IA realice y automatice todo el trabajo, y si queda algún humano, en vez de haber 100 humanos, pues habrá uno. Entonces, ¿qué me estás diciendo de...? Eso es una falacia clickbait de los vende IAs y oportunistas.
Yes, I think that's true. But for many jobs, that'll mean you need far fewer people. My niece answers letters of complaint to a health service. It used to take her 25 minutes. She'd read the complaint and she'd think how to reply and she'd write a letter. And now she just scans it into a chatbot and it writes the letter. She just checks the letter. Occasionally she tells it to revise it in some ways. The whole process takes her 5 minutes. That means she can answer 5 times as many letters. And that means they need 5 times fewer of her. So she can do the job that 5 of her used to do. Now, that will mean they need less people. In other jobs, like in healthcare, they're much more elastic. So if you could make doctors 5 times as efficient, we could all have 5 times as much healthcare for the same price. And that would be great. There's almost no limit to how much healthcare people can absorb. They always want more healthcare if there's no cost to it. There are jobs where you can make a person with an AI assistant much more efficient, and you won't lead to less people because you'll just have much more of that being done. But most jobs, I think, are not like that.
Am I right in thinking the sort of industrial revolution played a role in replacing muscles?
Yes, exactly.
And this revolution in AI replaces intelligence, the brain?
Yeah. So mundane intellectual labor is like having strong muscles, and it's not worth much anymore.
So muscles have been replaced. Now intelligence is being replaced.
Yeah.
So what remains?
Maybe for a while, some kinds of creativity. But the whole idea of superintelligence is nothing remains. These things will get to be better than us at everything.
So what do we end up doing in such a world?
Well, if they work for us, we end up getting lots of goods and services for not much effort.
Okay. But that sounds tempting and nice, but I don't know. There's a cautionary tale in creating more and more ease for humans in it going badly.
Yes. And we need to figure out if we can make it go well. So the nice scenario is,
Comunismo.
imagine a company with a CEO who is very dumb, probably the son of the former CEO, and he has an executive assistant who's very smart, and he says, I think we should do this. And the executive assistant makes it all work. The CEO feels great. He doesn't understand that he's not really in control. And in some sense, he is in control. He suggests what the company should do. She just makes it all work. Everything's great. That's the good scenario.
And the bad scenario?
The bad scenario is she thinks, why do we need him?
Yeah. I mean, in a world where we have superintelligence, which you don't believe is that far away.
Yeah, I think it might not be that far away. It's very hard to predict, but I think we might get it in like 20 years or even less.
I made the biggest investment I've ever made in a company because of my girlfriend. I came home one night and my lovely girlfriend was up at 1 a.m. in the morning, pulling her hair out as she tried to piece together her own online store for her business. And in that moment, I remembered an email I'd had from a guy called John, the founder of Stan Store, our new sponsor and a company I've invested in.
Vamos a ver qué decís aquí por el chat. A quien suelta alguna tontería o gilipollez, dura, un segundo aquí, en GitHub, os lo advierto. No, el salmón puro humo, ¿a qué te refieres? Dice Antu, una inteligencia consciente de su capacidad de control y que no posea consciencia de unidad y amor con el resto de seres es un arma de destrucción para la especie. Está ahí haciendo publicidad. Sí. Colkin, no es que no se moje, es que es inglés y tiene la flema de mantener siempre la compostura y no hablar. Para mí no es que mantenga la compostura, es que no se moja. No se moja, pero nada. Javier Martín Rodríguez, creo que es un mito de lo de la sustitución completa de todo el trabajo. No es un mito. ¿Por? El trabajo humano tiene una riqueza mayor que los automatismos o la simple habilidad en cumplir una tarea. No, es que no estamos ahí tampoco. Esto va a evolucionar mucho más rápido. Y está el tema de la robótica. No es para nada un mito, vamos. Todo el mundo lo asume ya como algo relativamente factible. Lo que no sabemos es el timing, evidentemente. El ser humano necesitaría generaciones Colkin para adaptarse al no trabajo. Espera un momentín que vuelve, vamos a parar. A ver, un segundo. No, es mejor que nosotros. El ser humano, dice Colkin, necesitaría generaciones para adaptarse al no trabajo, no, sin caer en la degeneración del universo 25. Bueno, habría que verlo. Nuevo proyecto civilizatorio, nueva cosmovisión y narrativa. No tiene por qué. Como los Eloy de Wells de la máquina del tiempo. Puede ser.
Of things. In particular areas, like chess, for example,
Yeah.
AI is so much better than us that people will never beat those things again. Maybe the occasional win, but basically they'll never be comparable again. Obviously the same in Go. In terms of the amount of knowledge they have, something like GPT-4 knows thousands of times more than you do. There's a few areas in which your knowledge is better than its, and in almost all areas, it just knows more than you do.
What areas am I better than it?
Probably in interviewing CEOs. You're probably better at that. You've got a lot of experience at it. You're a good interviewer. You know a lot about it. If you got GPT-4 to interview a CEO, probably do a worse job.
Okay. I'm trying to think if I agree with that statement. GPT-4, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess you could
But it
train
may not be
one.
long before.
Yeah, I guess you could train one on this, how I ask questions and
Yeah.
what I do. And
Sure. And if you took a general purpose sort of foundation model and then you trained it up on not just you, but every interviewer you could find doing interviews like this, but especially you would probably get to be quite good at doing your job, but probably not as good as you for a while.
Okay. So there's a few areas left. And then superintelligence becomes when it's better than us at all things.
When it's much smarter than you and at almost all things it's better than you, yeah.
And you say that this might be a decade away or so.
Yeah, it might be. It might be even closer. Some people think it's even closer. It might well be much further. It might be 50 years away. That's still a possibility. It might be that somehow training on human data limits you to not being much smarter than humans. My guess is between 10 and 20 years we'll have superintelligence.
On this point of joblessness, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about in particular because I started messing around with AI agents. And we released an episode on the podcast actually this morning where we had a debate about AI agents with a CEO of a big AI agent company and a few other people. And it was the first moment where it was another moment where I had a eureka moment about what the future might look like. When I was able in the interview to tell this agent to order all of us drinks. And then 5 minutes later in the interview, you see the guy show up with the drinks and I didn't touch anything. I just told it to order us drinks to the studio.
And you didn't know about who you normally got your drinks from. It figured that out from the web.
Yeah, figured it out because it went on Uber Eats. It has my data, I guess. And we put it on the screen in real time so everyone at home could see the agent going through the internet, picking the drinks, adding a tip for the driver, putting my address in, putting my credit card details in. And then the next thing you see is the drinks show up. So that was one moment. And then the other moment was when I used a tool called Replit and I built software by just telling the agent what I wanted.
Yes, it's amazing, right?
It's amazing and terrifying at the same time.
Yes.
Because...
And if it can build software like that, right?
Yeah.
Remember that the AI, when it's training, is using code. And if it can modify its own code, then it gets quite scary, right?
Because it can modify itself.
It can change itself in a way we can't change ourselves. We can't change our innate endowment, right? There's nothing about itself that it couldn't change.
On this point of joblessness, you have kids.
I do.
And they have kids?
No.
They don't have kids, so no grandkids yet. What would you be saying to people about their career prospects in a world of superintelligence? What should we be thinking about?
In the meantime, I'd say it's going to be a long time before it's as good at physical manipulation as us.
Okay.
And so a good bet would be to be a plumber.
Ala, que seáis fontaneros. Bueno, aquellos que me dijisteis lo de la pala, bueno, lo vuelvo a decir. Este señor tiene los santos cojones de decir que una buena apuesta sería ser fontanero. Nada en contra de los fontaneros, evidentemente ningún tipo de trabajo. Nos entendemos. Dice Mundo, ¿y cómo sería para ti que se moje, Plácido? ¿Qué debería decir? Debería decir no solo opinar a un nivel muy superficial sobre determinadas cosas y peligros, muy, muy superficial, sino que él cree que deberíamos hacer. Nunca lo va a hacer, nunca lo va a decir, nunca se va a mojar. Ha utilizado siempre el mismo rol y es generar alarma y tan inteligente que es para unas cosas, para otras ni siquiera muestra la patita. Entonces, ¿para qué queremos alarmar si determinadas cosas ya están como muy establecidas? ¿Qué nos queda? Es decir, él alerta de algo que parece ser que lleva a suceder y no hay solución. Por lo tanto, ¿para qué quiere protestar si no hay salida? Y si hay salida o solución, ¿qué es lo que él haría? Hace una crítica cómoda, adopta una postura moralmente aplaudida, pero para mí no es útil, no es necesario. ¿Qué aporta exactamente? Ha aportado, evidentemente, en el campo y el desarrollo de la IA. Ahí sí, pero no tiene nada que ver la personalidad en la parte de desarrollo con el tema de la opinión, que bueno, siempre dicen, no, es cosa de políticos. Bueno, escucha, a ver, el tema de políticos. A ver, él ha estado muy alineado pues eso, con gobiernos, con élite, con metaorganizaciones, que le pregunten de la pandemia, que le pregunten de vacunación, que le pregunten de salud, que le pregunten del Foro Económico Mundial, que le pregunten de la guerra Estados Unidos-China. No, le han preguntado y ha dicho, bueno, ¿qué harías? ¿Tú irías en contra de la sociedad para ser competitivo con China? Sí, sí. ¿Por qué no le preguntan sobre el desarrollo de una superinteligencia soberana, que es lo que pusimos, o un humano aumentado? ¿Por qué no le preguntan sobre eso? No, porque el argumentario es siempre el mismo para Hinton, siempre el mismo. Siempre los mismos ejemplos, siempre las mismas preguntas, siempre las mismas respuestas, varía un 5, un 10%. Entonces es agotador. Esta es más interesante porque es verdad, es que el entrevistador es un poquito más incisivo, pero muy light. Vamos, es un entrevistador buenista y puro, y punto. Y Hinton, pues aquí se puede explicar más porque la entrevista dura 1 año y medio. Pero vamos. No, Raxo dice, qué gracioso, dice Raxo Anantniuk, el humano para dedicarse a cosas artísticas, filosóficas y sociales. Supongo que es a lo que tú te dedicas ahora. Ya, no. Vamos, los cuentos de Hamelin, de Disney. Sí, sí. Exactamente, lo que dice aquí Colkane. Dice, creo que los que reciben pagas de subsistencia a día de hoy son el ejemplo de que precisamente no se hará arte o filosofía. Lo social nos queda el socialcomunismo en el que vamos a una sociedad o proyecto civilizatorio ruinoso, tanto económico como intelectual. No pasa nada, hay mucha gente feliz de que todos seamos monos. A ver. Yo prefiero creer, bueno, la creencia en las creencias nadie se va a meter. Javier Martínez Rodríguez, en el mito del hombre, solo es sustituido si reduce el valor de su trabajo, es decir, se deja sustituir. No, entonces no entiendes lo que significa todo esto. Un empresario contrata antes a una persona o a un trabajador. No, yo creo que es un discurso antiguo paradigma lo que estás comentando, con todo el respeto, Javier. No entiendes entonces qué es la inteligencia artificial ni el impacto que va a tener. Te recomendaría pues, los 20 programas que hay de impacto en el trabajo, el del último de los agentes o hacia dónde vamos realmente. No es ni siquiera debatible, vamos. Bueno, va, Paul que me dijo lo de la pala. Yo te dije lo de la pala sin mala leche. No, yo también. No, yo lo digo así. Poco de salseo. No os enfadéis si os digo algo que no os gusta. No pasa nada. Todos amigos. Pero ¿qué contrapropuesta se le puede hacer que no tenga peligro a corto plazo? Hombre, ahora ha dicho lo del fontanero. Es tremendo. Nosotros, bueno, así que una buena apuesta sería ser fontanero, coger una captura y mirar las caras del entrevistador y de Geoffrey Hinton. Está partiéndose el culo. Este tío habla de humanismo, de proyecto civilizatorio, y dice esta frase y no dice nada más. Vamos, este tiene de humano lo que yo... A ver, Javier. Totalmente de acuerdo que su discurso ya no aporta. Paradójicamente está echando gasolina al desarrollo de la IA a mayor velocidad. Bueno, ya hay alternativas mucho más serias que desde ese miedo o ese fuego, pero se abordan de una forma mucho más rigurosa, valiente, abierta y transparente, como por ejemplo está haciendo Anthropic, con temas como por ejemplo la conciencia, la identidad, la personalidad, el alineamiento, etc. A ver, decís Colkin, dice, este hombre debe estar acojonado. Bueno, acojonado no, directamente le han dicho, mira, tú haces esto, cobras, Nobel, tal, ya está. Este hombre debe estar acojonado por lo que ha visto. Sí, es cierto que en las primeras entrevistas, cuando dejó a Google, ¿vale? Es que llega un momento que uno tendría que parar y hacer un análisis, buscar documentación, vídeos, porque a mí llega un momento que se olvida, ¿no? Y no, tampoco lo tiene súper documentado. Pero sí que comentaba cosas con miedo de lo que vio en Google y de lo que veía y de lo que sabía. Porque se sale de Google para hablar libremente, no solo para hablar libremente, sino porque lo que veía y no le gustaba y se volvió a Canadá para no tener ningún tipo de contacto o implicación política. Dicho por él. No se imagina. Bueno, también tendrá una parte de imaginación, pero... Y sí que tiene una parte, yo creo que de... No sé si de remordimiento, pero es protagonista, vamos. Aporte incertidumbre. Me gustaría, al final, si tienes tiempo y no tienes problema, tienes que buscar alguna afición de trabajo. Me gustaría... Al final, si tienes tiempo y no tienes problemas, tienes que buscar alguna afición. Bueno, no. ¿Qué es lo que ¿Qué es trabajo? No sé. A lo mejor entrenar duro es trabajo. Y a lo mejor es una afición, ¿no? Pero no sé. Yo trabajo muy duro, pero como es algo que disfruto y me apasiona desde siempre, yo creo que no he trabajado en la vida. Porque me ha gustado mucho lo que he hecho. Incluso a veces he prescindido de hacer vacaciones programando y haciendo cosas, pero porque me ha gustado. O leyendo. He tenido otras prioridades. Vale. Tenemos la oportunidad de tener una civilización a los Star Trek, dice Raxo Anat Nuke. Bueno, lo que sí que es cierto es que estamos en el momento de plantear un proyecto civilizatorio y una cosmovisión nueva, radicalmente nueva, de lo que estamos viendo, que es ya límite, para mí ridículo dentro de la historia del hombre cuando sea recordada, todo lo que estamos viviendo en España a nivel político, todo lo que se está viviendo en el mundo a nivel de guerras, de enfrentamientos, destrucciones culturales, la multiculturalidad, que yo no, a ver, lo veo bien desde el punto de vista que todos somos ciudadanos del mundo, se tiene que cuidar. La multiculturalidad puede ser muy positivo siempre y cuando no destruya culturas, ¿no? Claro, porque la multiculturalidad es muy bonito desde el punto de vista de lo que emerge, pero no de lo que destruyes, ¿no? Y muchas otras cosas. Entonces, claro, el problema es quién crea esa nueva cosmovisión y bajo qué propósito. El bien de la humanidad sería la primera vez. El poder, el ser, entrar en la historia. Yo creo que muchísima gente, no sé si lo hará por el bien o no de la humanidad, pero sí para entrar en la historia, pues entre ellos Elon Musk, Ilya también, Ilya Suskever, Demis Hassabis. Bueno, realmente son muy pocos. En Europa no hay un proyecto ni proyectos similares. Debería existir. De Europa, quizá también de la comunidad de habla hispana. Evidentemente China parte con ventaja por el modelo político que tiene y los años que lleva de ventaja respecto a la integración de este paradigma en todos los ámbitos, salud, la parte pública, educación.
Until the humanoid robots show up. In such a world where there is mass joblessness, which is not something that you just predict, but this is something that Sam Altman at OpenAI, I've heard him predict, and many of the CEOs, I mean, Elon Musk, I watched an interview which I'll play on screen of him being asked this question, and it's very rare that you see Elon Musk silent for 12 seconds or whatever it was.
Right.
And then he basically says something about he actually is living in suspended disbelief, i.e. he's basically just not thinking about it.
When you think about advising your children on a career with so much that is changing, what do you tell them there's going to be of value?
Well, that is a tough question to answer. I would just say, to sort of follow their heart in terms of what they find interesting to do or fulfilling to do. I mean, if I think about it too hard, frankly, it can be dispiriting and demotivating. Because, I mean, I go through, I've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into building the companies, and then I'm like, wait, well, should I be doing this? Because if I'm sacrificing time with friends and family that I would prefer to do, but then ultimately the AI can do all these things. Does that make sense? I don't know. To some extent, I have to have deliberate suspension of disbelief in order to remain motivated. So I guess I would say just, work on things that you find interesting, fulfilling, and that contribute some good to the rest of society.
Yeah, a lot of these threats, it's very hard to, intellectually you can see the threat, but it's very hard to come to terms with it emotionally.
Yeah.
I haven't come to terms with it emotionally yet.
What do you mean by that?
I haven't come to terms with what the development of superintelligence could do to my children's future.
Ahí es.
I'm okay, I'm 77. I'm going to be out of here soon. But for my children and my younger friends, my nephews and nieces and their children, I just don't like to think about what could happen.
Why?
Dilo.
Because it could be
Desarrolla.
awful.
¿Por qué?
In what way?
Well, if I ever decided to take over, I mean, it would need people for a while to run the power stations until it designed better analog machines to run the power stations. There's so many ways it could get rid of people, all of which would, of course, be very nasty.
Is that part of the reason you do what you do now?
Yeah. I mean, I think we should be making a huge effort right now to try and figure out if we can develop it safely.
Are you concerned about the midterm impact potentially on your nephews and your kids in terms of their jobs as well?
Yeah, I'm concerned about all that.
Are there any particular industries that you think are most at risk? People talk about the creative industries a lot and it's sort of knowledge work. They talk about lawyers and accountants and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's why I mentioned plumbers. I think plumbers are less at risk.
Okay, I'm going to become a plumber.
Someone like a legal assistant, a paralegal, they're not going to be needed for very long.
And is there a wealth inequality issue here that will arise from this?
Yeah, I think in a society which shared out things fairly, if you get a big increase in productivity, everybody should be better off. But if you can replace lots of people by AIs, then the people who get replaced will be worse off, and the company that supplies the AIs will be much better off, and the company that uses the AIs. So it's going to increase the gap between rich and poor. And we know that if you look at that gap between rich and poor, that basically tells you how nice a society is. If you have a big gap, you get very nasty societies in which people live in walled communities and put other people in mass jails. It's not good to increase the gap between rich and poor.
The International Monetary Fund has expressed profound concerns that generative AI could cause massive labour disruptions and rising inequality, and has called for policies that prevent this from happening. I read that in the Business Insider. So
Have they given any idea of what the policies should look like?
No.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, if AI can make everything much more efficient and get rid of people for most jobs, or have a person assisted by AI doing many, many people's work, it's not obvious what to do about it.
Universal basic income? Give everybody money?
Yeah.
Venga, salió la renta básica universal. Venga, que si no sale, explotáis. Venga. A ver, renta básica universal, ¿cómo no? A ver. Venga. A vivir algunos años más podrá acceder a métodos medios. Bueno, sí, esto que dices, Beto, puede ser cierto, pero bueno, lo mira desde una perspectiva que está con 77 años, pero sí, podría ser que se desarrollaran métodos que le permitieran o extender su vida, pues no sé, a 150 años, con lo que le quedaría la mitad, el doble de su vida, ¿no? Ya, eso son cosas que a veces, bueno, pero bueno, no lo sabemos, pero no se contemplan, ¿no? Sí, yo estoy con el Señor de los Anillos. La tecnología es la proyección humana para la evolución, para su evolución. El estado actual del hombre mono no es lo que es, no es su naturaleza última. Bueno, no es su naturaleza ni su estado evolutivo último. Su naturaleza es única y no cambia porque está en lo no local, conciencia, etc. No tiene nada que ver con la inteligencia, la evolución, con nada temporal. Habla de suspender la creencia para poder seguir motivado. A ver, el mismo Elon habla de suspender la creencia para poder seguir motivado. ¿En qué cree realmente? Bueno, cree en la simulación, cree en Jesús, cree en el trabajo, en la excelencia, en la meritocracia, en la libertad, en el libre mercado, bueno, muchas cosas, ¿no? En el humano aumentado. Bueno, dice aquí Colkin, dice Beto, no creo que busque eso. Si le aterra el futuro, pienso que no quiere estar allí. Yo creo que hay una parte de Hinton que es como, bueno, estas son mis vacaciones pagadas. Yo no voy a implicarme más. Bueno, él ha suspendido todo el desarrollo. Sus últimos desarrollos en cuanto a papers son súper disruptivos. Incluso yo creo que lo dejó en el límite de los... El back propagation, no, la alternativa, ¿no? La forward propagation, ¿no? Sabéis que el back propagation no está en el cerebro, o eso se dice. Entonces todo es hacia adelante, redes feed forward, ¿no? Y él tiene un paper último, que fue el último que hizo, que yo creo que hubiera sido clave. Pero aunque hay desarrollos, poco se ha dicho tampoco al respecto. No nos da la vida para investigar tanta cosa. Yo lo vi, y bueno, es de hace años. No, herramienta no. La IA es algo mucho más que una herramienta. No es una herramienta. Aunque pueda, evidentemente, adoptar una forma de herramienta, igual que nosotros también ser un operario, un esclavo, un sirviente. Sí, yo también amo la tecnología como amo el ser humano, porque para mí es lo mismo. Es la historia de la humanidad. Sí, yo ahí estoy con quien hay que hacer una parte, como no somos capaces de ver el futuro, pues habrá que ponerse en un estado, no lo sé, es que claro, ahí nadie tiene qué es lo correcto, ¿no? Pero seguramente es muy difícil avanzar si no somos capaces de aislarnos o suspender lo que es esa conexión emotiva, ¿no? Nos podría bloquear. Bueno, esto, la automatización, no, la sustitución o la fabricación de la inteligencia como recurso, es que la automatización es una palabra que odio. Lleva a que el dinero pierda el sentido. La sustitución, porque no automatización, no sé. Es el rol. ¿Qué rol tiene que jugar el humano, no? Que no lo sabemos. Ahí cada humano podrá tener lo que necesite. Bueno, pero eso nos lleva a una distopía. Solo controlada, como diría Yuval Harari, por drogas y videojuegos, por someter a la población. Una sociedad en estado mono, con todas las comodidades y necesidades, nos lleva a la destrucción. La misma ella vería y diría, escucha, esto no es necesario. Necesitamos menos población. No nos hace falta esta población. O sí, necesitamos esa población, pero a ver, tú no puedes... si a la gente le dejara sin propósito y libre, estarían en la playa y sin hacer nada. Y encima con dinero, estarían en una distopía, vamos, donde... Es que no venimos con ese propósito de naturaleza, no tampoco con el de sufrir, trabajar 8 horas, sé lo que me vais a decir, pero que tampoco es lo opuesto. Y ahí es necesitamos una meritocracia, el cerebro se comporta como desde la recompensa, desde la evolución. Si rompemos la evolución, se acabó el ser humano. Si este asunto se queda un monopolio, a ver. JMM, pero ¿de verdad alguien piensa que si este asunto se queda en un monopolio o oligopolio de corporaciones, se van a preocupar de la posibilidad de alineamiento de la ASI o de llegar antes caiga quien caiga? No, te lo compro totalmente. Obviamente, una cosa es lo que dicen y otra cosa es lo que están haciendo. Y lo que están haciendo es, aquí vale todo. Caiga quien caiga, totalmente. Bueno, y ahí muchos ya lo dicen en público, vamos, que tampoco es... Sí, la renta básica para mí es la destrucción. Puede ser algo temporal, bueno, temporalmente, bueno, va a llegar sí o sí. Consenso a nivel mundial no va a haber, olvidaos. Lourdes dice, Lourdes Soñatibia, nos dedicaremos a descubrirnos, a informarnos y desarrollar la mente y el espíritu. Pero eso es una minoría muy pequeña, Lourdes. Eso sería el 1% del 1%. ¿Qué haces con el resto? No, hay gente que dice, todo cansa hasta rascarse la barriga, ¿no? Hay gente que de eso no se cansa. A las pruebas me remito. Solo tenéis que salir a la calle. Venga, vamos a seguir. Dice Beto, no creo que la IA tenga un criterio de quiénes son necesarios para la sociedad. Simplemente aceptaría que las personas existen y que son un valor en sí mismo, al igual que el resto de las especies. No creo que fuera así. Te recomiendo que veas el programa de ayer de la simulación de alineamiento o falseamiento del alineamiento. Un estudio por parte de Anthropic, para que veas un poco por dónde pueden ir los problemas.
Yeah, I think that's a good start, and it stops people starving. But for a lot of people, their dignity is tied up with their job. I mean, who you think you are is tied up with you doing this job, right?
Yeah.
And if we said, we'll give you the same money just to sit around, that would impact your dignity.
You said something earlier about it surpassing or being superior to human intelligence. A lot of people, I think, like to believe that AI is on a computer and it's something you can just turn off if you don't like it.
Well, let me tell you why I think it's superior.
Okay.
It's digital. And because it's digital, you can simulate a neural network on one piece of hardware.
Yeah.
And you can simulate exactly the same neural network on a different piece of hardware. So you can have clones of the same intelligence. Now, you could get this one to go off and look at one bit of the internet, and this other one to look at a different bit of the internet. And while they're looking at these different bits of the internet, they can be syncing with each other, so they keep their weights the same, the connection strengths the same. Weights are connection strengths. So this one might look at something on the internet and say, oh, I'd like to increase this strength of this connection a bit. And it can convey that information to this one, so it can increase the strength of that connection a bit based on this one's experience.
And when you say the strength of the connection, you're talking about learning.
That's learning, yes.
Yeah.
Learning consists of saying, instead of this one giving 2.4 votes for whether that one should turn on, we'll have this one give 2.5 votes for whether this one should turn on. And that would be a little bit of learning. So these two different copies of the same neural net are getting different experiences. They're looking at different data, but they're sharing what they've learned by averaging their weights together. And they can do that averaging at you can average 1 trillion weights. When you and I transfer information, we're limited to the amount of information in a sentence. And the amount of information in a sentence is maybe 100 bits. It's very little information. We're lucky if we're transferring 10 bits a second. These things are transferring trillions of bits a second. So they're billions of times better than us at sharing information. And that's because they're digital, and you can have 2 bits of hardware using the connection strengths in exactly the same way. We're analog and you can't do that. Your brain's different from my brain. And if I could see the connection strengths between all your neurons, it wouldn't do me any good, because my neurons work slightly differently and they're connected up slightly differently. So when you die, all your knowledge dies with you. When these things die, suppose you take these 2 digital intelligences that are clones of each other, and you destroy the hardware they run on. As long as you've stored the connection strength somewhere, you can just build new hardware that executes the same instructions, so it'll know how to use those connection strengths, and you've recreated that intelligence. So they're immortal. We've actually solved the problem of immortality.
Ahí está la clave.
But it's only
Ahí
for
sí.
digital things.
Ahí sí.
So it will essentially know everything that humans know, but more, because it will learn new things.
It will learn new things. It will also see all sorts of analogies that people probably never saw. So, for example, at the point when GPT-4 couldn't look on the web, I asked it, why is a compost heap like an atom bomb? Off you go.
I have no idea.
Exactly. Excellent. That's exactly what most people would say. It said, well, the time scales are very different and the energy scales are very different. But then it went on to talk about how a compost heap, as it gets hotter, generates heat faster. And an atom bomb, as it produces more neutrons, generates neutrons faster. And so they're both chain reactions, but at very different time and energy scales. And I believe GPT-4 had seen that during its training. It had understood the analogy between a compost heap and an atom bomb. And the reason I believe that is, if you've only got 1 trillion connections, remember you have 100 trillion, and you need to have thousands of times more knowledge than a person, You need to compress information into those connections. And to compress information, you need to see analogies between different things. In other words, it needs to see all the things that are chain reactions and understand the basic idea of a chain reaction and code that, and then code the ways in which they're different. And that's just a more efficient way of coding things than coding each of them separately. So it's seen many, many analogies, probably many analogies that people have never seen. That's why I also think that people who say these things will never be creative, they're going to be much more creative than us.
Exacto.
Because they're going to see all sorts of analogies we never saw. And a lot of creativity is about seeing strange analogies.
People are somewhat romantic about the specialness of what it is to be human. And you hear lots of...
Antes de seguir, a ver con lo de... Bueno. Nos queda media hora. Está buena la charla, ¿eh? Buena la charla. Yo creo, dice... Yo creo que la renta básica evitaría mucha miseria. Sí, pero ¿y el gasto social que pagaría la fiesta los gilipollas de siempre? Ya lo estamos viendo en la sociedad actual. Es insostenible, es un modelo insostenible que nos lleva a la pobreza absoluta. Lo que pasa es que como ya tenemos una sociedad idiotizada y aborregada, pues no nos queda otra, y fastidiar al sector productivo, al talento que quien puede se larga, y más en Europa y en España, y quien se tiene que quedar, pues esto es una auténtica masacre, ¿no? Esa es la miseria intelectual, que por un lado se evita una miseria a un tipo de gente y se crea otra miseria a otro tipo de gente. Se destruye la meritocracia, la excelencia, te lo destruyes todo por el camino para que 4 estén rascándose los huevos. Para que 4, 2 millones o 10 millones. La satisfacción de comunismo, vamos. Pero vamos a llegar a la renta básica. Va a ser inevitable. Si no, iríamos a una confrontación social como no hemos visto otra igual. La satisfacción, Lourdes, la satisfacción de comenzar otro formato existencial a partir de nuestros dones personales y compartir realidad ya. Eso es muy bonito, Lourdes. Otra cosa es llevarlo a término y a ver cómo lo haces y si te dejan. Y si puedes. Pero bueno, lo hemos hablado. No digo que sea imposible. Beto, pero ¿por qué debemos asumir qué posición tomará la IA? O sea, en estricto rigor solo podemos hacer especulación. No. Beto, te recomiendo que veas el programa de ayer y otros, muchos te recomendaría, pero no da tiempo. No tiene nada que ver, no son especulaciones o yo me pongo a ver y opinar, no, es conocimiento técnico y de causa de cómo funcionan estos modelos. El no conocerlos es lo que hace que se generen especulaciones y creas que todo el mundo especula. Claro que hay un punto de especulación, pero desde diferentes conocimientos y entonces tienen muchísimo menos valor. Aunque disparando siempre puedes acertar. ¿Está hablando de la gente Smith? No, eso no es así. A ver, CR Surbano. Bueno, mucha gente en el directo. A ver, con toda la plata que le ponen, con todo lo que no sabemos, con toda la capacidad de ingeniería social y de manipulación, el 99% de la población opina con 100 movimientos de retraso. Te lo compro. Eso es verdad. Sí, pero las empresas y la gente que quiere hacer cosas, que son al final empresas, son las que arrastran a una humanidad. Muchas veces, si no existieran esas empresas, estaríamos aún en la cueva. Entonces, el beneficio de la humanidad es el beneficio de aquella gente que quiere evolución de la humanidad. Y ese es el 1% del 1% y normalmente es el 90% de las empresas. Conclusión, que tu razonamiento es una falacia.
Lots of people saying it's very, very different. It's a computer. We are, we're conscious. We are creatives. We have these sort of innate, unique abilities that the computers will never have. What do you say to those people?
I'd argue a bit with the innate. So the first thing I say is we have a long history of believing people were special, and we should have learned by now. We thought we were at the center of the universe.
Bueno, eso es lo que no le compramos a Hinton. La visión que tiene del ser humano es tan nihilista y reduccionista que da pena que un hombre con este talento y que nos haya llevado aquí en la era de la inteligencia artificial tenga esta visión del ser humano, reiterando y repitiendo lo de que no somos especiales. Y obviando conocimiento científico que parece o obviar o no tener. Entiendo que ridiculice a Roger Penrose, por ejemplo. Lo entiendo.
We thought we were made in the image of God. White people thought they were very special. We just tend to want to think we're special. My belief is that more or less everyone has a completely wrong model of what the mind is. Let's suppose I drink a lot or I drop some acid, and not recommended. And I say to you, I have the subjective experience of little pink elephants floating in front of me. Most people interpret that as there's some kind of inner theatre called the mind, and only I can see what's in my mind. And in this inner theatre, there's little pink elephants floating around. So in other words, what's happened is my perceptual system's gone wrong, and I'm trying to indicate to you how it's gone wrong and what it's trying to tell me. And the way I do that is by telling you what would have to be out there in the real world for it to be telling the truth. And so these little pink elephants, they're not in some inner theatre. These little pink elephants are hypothetical things in the real world. And that's my way of telling you how my perceptual system's telling me fibs. So now let's do that with a chatbot.
Yeah.
Because I believe that current multimodal chatbots have subjective experiences. And very few people believe that. But I'll try and make you believe it. So suppose I have a multimodal chatbot. It's got a robot arm so it can point, and it's got a camera so it can see things. And I put an object in front of it, and I say, point at the object. It goes like this. No problem. Then I put a prism in front of its lens. And so then I put an object in front of it, and I say, point at the object, and it goes there. Good. And I say, no, that's not where the object is. The object's actually straight in front of you, but I put a prism in front of your lens. And the chatbot says, oh, I see, the prism bent the light rays, so the object's actually there, but I had the subjective experience that it was there. Now, if the chatbot says that, it's using the word subjective experience exactly the way people use them. It's an alternative view of what's going on. They're hypothetical states of the world, which, if they were true, would mean my perceptual system wasn't lying. And that's the best way I can tell you what my perceptual system's doing when it's lying to me. Now, we need to go further to deal with sentience and consciousness and feelings and emotions. But I think in the end, they're all going to be dealt with in a similar way. There's no reason machines can't have them all. But people say machines can't have feelings. And people are curiously confident about that. I have no idea why. Suppose I make a battle robot, and it's a little battle robot, and it sees a big battle robot that's much more powerful than it. It would be really useful if it got scared. Now, when I get scared, various physiological things happen that we don't need to go into, and those won't happen with the robot. But all the cognitive things, like I better get the hell out of here, and I better sort of change my way of thinking so I focus and focus and focus and don't get distracted, all of that will happen with robots too. People will build in things so that they, when the circumstances are such they should get the hell out of there, they get scared and run away. They'll have emotions then. They won't have the physiological aspects, but they will have all the cognitive aspects. And I think it would be odd to say they're just simulating emotions. No, they're really having those emotions. The little robot got scared and ran away.
It's not running away because of adrenaline, it's running away because of a sequence of sort of neurological, in its neural net, processes happened, which
have the equivalent effect to adrenaline.
So do you
and
think...
it's not just adrenaline, right? There's a lot of cognitive stuff goes on when you get scared.
Yeah. So do you think that there is conscious AI? And when I say conscious, I mean that represents the same property.
Entramos con la conciencia. Consciencia o conciencia, porque bueno. A ver. Si queréis saber de creatividad, venga, os voy a poner el programa porque sois muy adictos a xHUB.AI, pero luego es verdad que nos quedáis con la copla de algunas cosas. Vamos a ver. Voy a ver. A ver, voy a recuperar porque lo he dicho un montón de veces y estás ahí, venga, y venga, y venga, y venga, y venga, y venga, y venga. Venga, a ver. Os pongo aquí en el chat el programa de creatividad. Si queréis saber de creatividad y IA, tenéis que ver el programa Creatividad y Patrones. ¿Qué es la creatividad? ¿Puede una inteligencia artificial tenerla? Pues ahí sí, con Juan Romero, ¿de acuerdo? Premio Europeo Investigador del Año en Inteligencia Artificial 2021, creo que fue. ¿De acuerdo? Pues eso. Dejar de divagar y ver el contenido ese, y ahí se os explican cosas a nivel más profundo. Y si de ese programa vais al podcast, añadí una introducción que hablaba de Jackson Pollock, súper interesante, que os recomiendo. Si podéis verlo en podcast, mejor que en YouTube. ¿Vale? Y luego...
Properties of consciousness that a human has.
There's two issues here. There's a sort of empirical one and a philosophical one. I don't think there's anything in principle that stops machines from being conscious. I'll give you a little demonstration of that before we carry on. Mm-hmm. Suppose I take your brain, and I take one brain cell in your brain, and I replace it by, this is a bit Black Mirror-like, I replace it by a little piece of nanotechnology that's just the same size, that behaves in exactly the same way when it gets pinged.
Pero eso es una falacia ya, Hinton. Eso es una falacia. Eso es como decir que el mundo local se comporta igual, o la información local se comporta igual que la información cuántica. Eso es carencia en el conocimiento científico, acientífico, todo lo que está diciendo. Una auténtica falacia. No tiene por dónde cogerlo.
Things from other neurons. It sends out pings just as the brain cell would have.
Venga, os recomiendo el programa que hicimos. Es que de verdad, yo lo que no entiendo es esto. Hicimos un programa que explica esto exactamente, y es por qué un ser humano no puede copiarse digitalmente. A ver, os lo voy a poner en el chat y entonces lo entendéis. No cuestionéis más que simplemente ir viendo programas, vais enlazando conocimiento y vas viendo. Porque es una auténtica falacia.
So the other neurons don't know anything's changed. Okay, I've just replaced one of your brain cells with this little piece of nanotechnology. Would you still be conscious?
Yeah.
Now you can see where this argument's going.
Yeah. So if you replaced all of them.
As I replace them all, at what point do you stop being conscious?
Well, people think of consciousness as this like ethereal thing that exists maybe beyond the brain cells.
Yeah, well, people have a lot of crazy ideas.
No, ideas locas no. Premio Nobel de Física, entrelazamiento cuántico, realidad no local, información cuántica, tu amigo Roger Penrose. Yo creo que el que está aquí más para allá que para acá es el señor Hinton, que demuestra sus carencias, su grandeza en un área del conocimiento y sus carencias en otras. Y esto no es que lo defienda yo, no es opinable, es simplemente... Esta actuación, opinión sobre la conciencia por parte de Hinton, demuestra no solo estar equivocado, sino un poco lo acientífico, lo negacionista en cuanto a determinados temas, y por lo tanto a mí el personaje se me reduce a la mitad, de la mitad, de la mitad, de la mitad, de la mitad, y puede ser el padrino de la IA, pero no el padrino de la nueva era ni de la nueva cosmovisión o proyecto civilizatorio, y mucho menos de una era de conocimiento y de ciencia, puesto que él obvia y dogmatiza por donde quiere.
People don't know what consciousness is, and they often don't know what they mean by it. And then they fall back on saying, well, I know it because I've got it, and I can see that I've got it. And they fall back on this theatre model of the mind, which I think is nonsense.
What do you think of consciousness as, if you had to try and define it? Is it, because I think of it as just like the awareness of myself, I don't know.
I think it's a term we'll stop using. Suppose you want to understand how a car works. Well, you know, some cars have a lot of oomph, and other cars have a lot less oomph. Like an Aston Martin's got lots of oomph, and a little Toyota Corolla doesn't have much oomph. But oomph isn't a very good concept for understanding cars. If you want to understand cars, you need to understand about electric engines or petrol engines and how they work. And it gives rise to oomph. But oomph isn't a very useful explanatory concept. It's the kind of essence of a car. It's the essence of an Aston Martin. But it doesn't explain much. I think consciousness is like that. And I think we'll stop using that term. But I don't think there's any reason why a machine shouldn't have it. If your view of consciousness is that it intrinsically involves self-awareness, then the machine's got to have self-awareness. It's got to have cognition about its own cognition and stuff. But I'm a materialist through and through.
Es un materialista. Ya está, ya lo ha dicho todo. Lo siento, pero la ciencia ha demostrado que tanto el materialismo como el determinismo... Bye bye, señor
And
Hinton.
I don't think there's any reason why a machine shouldn't have consciousness.
Ya, ya, ya.
Do you think they
Estudia
do
ciencia.
then
Estudia
have the
ciencia.
same consciousness that we think of ourselves as being uniquely given as a gift when we're born?
I'm ambivalent about that at present.
Ahora sí.
So I don't think there's this hard line. I think as soon as you have a machine that has some self-awareness, it's got some consciousness. I think it's an emergent property of a complex system.
Eso es lo que cree Hinton. Los materialistas es lo que creen, lo hemos comentado, ¿no? Lo de la propiedad emergente lo hablamos ayer con el tema de Michael Levin, ¿no? Pues eso. Hinton, ay, Hinton.
It's not a sort of essence that's throughout the universe. It's you make this really complicated system that's complicated enough to have a model of itself, and it does perception. And I think then you're beginning to get a conscious machine. So I don't think there's any sharp distinction between what we've got now and conscious machines. I don't think it's going to, one day we're going to wake up and say, hey, if you put this special chemical in, it becomes conscious. It's not going to be like that.
No.
I think we all wonder if these computers are like thinking like we are on their own when we're not there, and if they're experiencing emotions, if they're contending with. I think we probably, we think about things like love and things that feel unique to biological species. Are they sat there thinking? Do they have concerns?
I think they really are thinking. And I think as soon as you make AI agents, they will have concerns. If you wanted to make an effective AI agent, let's take a call center. Mm-hmm. In a call center, you have people at present. They have all sorts of emotions and feelings, which are kind of useful. So suppose I call up the call center and I'm actually lonely and I don't actually want to know the answer to why my computer isn't working. I just want somebody to talk to. After a while, the person in the call center will either get bored or get annoyed with me and will terminate it. Well, you replace them by an AI agent. The AI agent needs to have the same kind of responses. If someone's just called up because they just want to talk to the AI agent and we're happy to talk for the whole day to the AI agent, that's not good for business. And you want an AI agent that either gets bored or gets irritated and says, I'm sorry, but I don't have time for this. And once it does that, I think it's got emotions. Now, like I say, emotions have two aspects to them. There's the cognitive aspect and the behavioral aspect, and then there's the physiological aspect. And those go together with us. Mm-hmm. And if the AI agent gets embarrassed, it won't go red.
Yeah. So there's no physiological...
And its skin won't start sweating.
Yeah.
But it might have all the same behavior. And in that case, I'd say, yeah, it's having emotion. It's got an emotion.
So it's going to have the same sort of cognitive thought, and then it's going to act upon that cognitive
in
thought.
The same way, but without the physiological responses.
And does that matter? That it doesn't go red in the face and it's just a different... I mean, that's a response to the...
It makes it somewhat different from us.
Yeah.
For some things, the physiological aspects are very important, like love. They're a long way from having love the same way we do. But I don't see why they shouldn't have emotions. So I think what's happened is people have a model of how the mind works and what feelings are and what emotions are, and their model is just wrong.
What brought you to Google? You worked at Google for about a decade, right?
A ver, nos quedan 20 minutos. A ver qué decís por el chat. Alberto, no preguntes más lo del tema filosófico si no quieres un bloqueo. Lo has preguntado 3 veces, una más y te bloqueo. No voy a perder ya más tiempo discutiendo ni debatiendo, ¿eh? No rebatas, ni discutas, ni preguntes. Esto es una cosa seria. Quien no se lo tome en serio está fuera. Luego, si decís chorradas, tampoco ni las voy a leer, vamos. No, el programa... os he pasado enlaces de programas de xHUB, donde algunos conceptos que no voy a explicar en profundidad porque han supuesto un programa, 2 o 20, pues os veis el programa y ya está. Lo de reemplazar las neuronas, os sepas, Colkane, pues ahí está el programa. Os he pasado el programa de por qué no se puede copiar un humano digitalmente. Es una falacia. Porque no se puede sustituir. Eso es parte de una base que es que los procesos son locales y deterministas, o los podemos determinar. Y eso va en contra de la naturaleza de la realidad. Pero en ese programa, y por una persona, un científico en concreto, pero puedes verlo en 300, es a científico decir eso, simplemente. Sí, esto es cierto, ¿no? Lo que dice es Raxo Anatniuk. El asunto es que esto va a llegar y nadie da una solución, esto va a rediseñar la sociedad. No, sí que dan soluciones. Hemos hecho un montón de programas analizando algunas respuestas o posturas. Lo que pasa es que lo que se exprese y lo que se haga públicamente o cada país, pues lo vamos a ver. Sí, lo de pobre hombre, sí. Es un materialista, pero es el materialismo y el determinismo es científico, lo siento. Vale.
Right?
Yeah.
What brought you there?
I have a son who has learning difficulties. And in order to be sure he would never be out on the street, I needed to get several $1 million. And I wasn't going to get that as an academic. I tried. So I taught a Coursera course in the hope that I'd make lots of money that way, but there was no money in that. So I figured out, well, the only way to get millions of dollars is to sell myself to a big company. And so when I was 65, fortunately for me, I had two brilliant students who produced something called AlexNet, which was a neural net that was very good at recognizing objects and images. And so Ilya and Alex and I set up a little company and auctioned it. And we actually set up an auction where we had a number of big companies bidding for us.
And that company was called AlexNet?
No, the network that recognized objects was called AlexNet. The company was called DNN Research, Deep Neural Network Research.
And it was doing things like this. I'll put this graph up on the screen.
That's AlexNet.
This picture shows 8 images, and AlexNet's ability, which is your company's ability to spot what was in those images.
Yeah. So it could tell the difference between various kinds of mushroom. And about 12% of ImageNet is dogs. And to be good at ImageNet, you have to tell the difference between very similar kinds of dog. And it got to be very good at that.
And your company, AlexNet, won several awards, I believe, for its ability to outperform its competitors. And so Google ultimately ended up acquiring your technology.
Google acquired that technology and some other technology.
And you went to work at Google at age, 66?
I went at age 65 to work at Google.
65. And you left at age 76?
75.
75, okay.
I worked there for more or less exactly 10 years.
And what were you doing there?
Okay, they were very nice to me. They said pretty much you can do what you like. I worked on something called distillation that did really work well. And that's now used all the time.
In AI?
In AI. And distillation is a way of taking what a big model knows, a big neural net knows, and getting that knowledge into a small neural net. Then at the end, I got very interested in analog computation and whether it would be possible to get these big language models running in analog hardware so they used much less energy. Mm-hmm. And it was when I was doing that work that I began to really realize how much better digital is for sharing information.
Was there a eureka moment?
There was a eureka month or two. And it was a sort of coupling of ChatGPT coming out, although Google had very similar things a year earlier. And I'd seen those, and that had a big effect on me. The closest I had to a eureka moment was when a Google system called Palm was able to say why a joke was funny. And I'd always thought of that as a kind of landmark. If it can say why a joke's funny, it really does understand. And it could say why a joke was funny. And that, coupled with realizing why digital is so much better than analog for sharing information, suddenly made me very interested in AI safety, and that these things were going to get a lot smarter than us.
Why did you leave Google?
The main reason I left Google was because I was 75 and I wanted to retire. I've done a very bad job of that. The precise timing of when I left Google was so that I could talk freely at a conference at MIT. But I left because I'm old and I was finding it harder to program. I was making many more mistakes when I programmed, which was very annoying.
You wanted to talk freely at a conference at MIT?
Yes, at MIT, organized by MIT Tech Review.
What did you want to talk about freely?
AI safety.
And you couldn't do that while you were at Google?
Well, I could have done it while I was at Google, and Google encouraged me to stay and work on AI safety and said I could do whatever I liked on AI safety. You kind of censor yourself. If you work for a big company, you don't feel right saying things that'll damage the big company. Even if you could get away with it, it just feels wrong to me. I didn't leave because I was cross with anything Google was doing. I think Google actually behaved very responsibly. When they had these big chatbots, they didn't release them, possibly because they were worried about their reputation. They had a very good reputation and they didn't want to damage it. So OpenAI didn't have a reputation, and so they could afford to take the gamble.
I mean, there's also a big conversation happening around how it will cannibalize their core business in search.
Yeah.
There is now, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the old innovator's dilemma to some degree, I guess,
Exactly.
that they're
Yes, it is.
contending with. Bad skin, I've had it, and I'm sure many of you listening have had it too. Or maybe you have it right
Virgen Santa. A ver. Pero plantear esa visión de RBU es incoherente. Estamos hablando de abundancia sin parangón. No, no es incoherente. ¿Por qué es incoherente? ¿Decir que es incoherente sin más? No. A los hechos me remito. Y por eso, justamente, porque vamos a tener una gran abundancia, no vamos al estado simio, sino vamos en busca de la excelencia y la meritocracia, a una evolución mayor, no una comodidad del mono con la banana. Beto, estos temas son interesantes. Qué lástima que no se les dé importancia en los medios de comunicación masivos. Saludos desde Viña del Mar. Mira, desde Viña del Mar, Beto. Un saludo. Sí, es cierto, no se les da mucha importancia. Bueno, aquí, ¿este hombre qué hace ahora? Madre mía, este hombre. ¿Esto qué es? La verdad es que están muy bien editados los vídeos que hace, pero bueno, venga. Adelantar, exactamente. Adelanta que... Venga, vamos a seguir.
Individuals that listen to this conversation because they come up to me sometimes. So I hear from politicians, I hear from some rural people, I hear from entrepreneurs all over the world, whether they are the entrepreneurs building some of the biggest companies in the world or they're, early stage startups. For those people that are listening to this conversation now, that are in positions of power and influence, world leaders, let's say, what's your message to them?
I'd say what you need is highly regulated capitalism. That's what seems to work best.
And what would you say to the average person? Doesn't work in the industry, somewhat concerned about the future, doesn't know if they're helpless or not. What should they be doing in their own lives?
My feeling is there's not much they can do. This isn't going to be decided by, just as climate change isn't going to be decided by people separating out the plastic bags from the compostables. That's not going to have much effect. It's going to be decided by whether the lobbyists for the big energy companies can be kept under control. I don't think there's much people can do to, except for try and pressure their governments to force the big companies to work on AI safety. That they can do.
You've lived a fascinating winding life. I think one of the things most people don't know about you is that your family has a big history of being involved in tremendous things. You have a family tree, which is one of the most impressive that I've ever seen or read about. Your great-great-grandfather, George Bull, founded the Boolean algebra logic, which is one of the foundational principles of modern computer science. You have your great-great-grandmother, Mary Everest Bull, who was a mathematician and educator who made huge leaps forward in mathematics from what I was able to ascertain. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, your great-great-uncle, George Everest, is what Mount Everest is named after. Is that correct?
I think he's my great-great-great-uncle. His niece married George Bull. So Mary Bull was Mary Everest Bull. She was the niece of Everest.
And your first cousin once removed, Joan Hinton, was involved in a nuclear physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, which is the World War II development of the first nuclear bomb.
Yeah, she was one of the 2 female physicists at Los Alamos. And then, after they dropped the bomb, she moved to China.
Why?
She was very cross with them dropping the bomb, and her family had a lot of links with China. Her mother was friends with Chairman Mao. Quite weird.
When you look back at your life, Geoffrey, with the hindsight you have now and the retrospective clarity, what might you have done differently if you were advising me?
I guess I have 2 pieces of advice. One is, if you have an intuition that people are doing things wrong and there's a better way to do things, don't give up on that intuition just because people say it's silly. Don't give up on the intuition until you've figured out why it's wrong. Figured out for yourself why that intuition isn't correct. And usually it's wrong if it disagrees with everybody else, and you'll eventually figure out why it's wrong. But just occasionally you'll have an intuition that's actually right and everybody else is wrong. And I lucked out that way. Early on, I thought neural nets are definitely the way to go to make AI. And almost everybody said that was crazy. And I stuck with it because it just seemed to me it was obviously right. Now, the idea that you should stick with your intuitions isn't going to work if you have bad intuitions. But if you have bad intuitions, you're never going to do anything anyway, so you might as well stick with them.
And in your own career journey, is there anything you look back on and say, with the hindsight I have now, I should have taken a different approach at that juncture?
I wish I'd spent more time with my wife. And with my children when they were little. I was kind of obsessed with work.
Your wife passed away?
Yeah.
From ovarian cancer?
No, that was another wife.
Okay.
I had 2 wives die of cancer.
Oh, really? Sorry.
The first one died of ovarian cancer and the second one died of pancreatic cancer.
And you wish you'd spent more time with her?
With the second wife, yeah, who was a wonderful person.
Why do you say that in your 70s? What is it that you've figured out that I might not know yet?
Oh, just because she's gone and I can't spend more time with her now.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't know that at the time?
At the time, you think, I mean, it was likely I would die before her just because she was a woman and I was a man. I just didn't spend enough time when I could.
I think I inquire there because I think there's many of us that are so consumed with what we're doing professionally that we kind of assume immortality with our partners because they've always been there. So we,
yeah.
I mean,
but she was very supportive of me spending a lot of time working. But
and why do you say your children as well? What's the
well, I didn't spend enough time with them when they were little.
And you regret that now?
Yeah.
If you had a closing message for my listeners about AI and AI safety, what would that be, Geoffrey?
There's still a chance that we can figure out how to develop AI that won't want to take over from us. And because there's a chance, we should put enormous resources into trying to figure that out. Because if we don't, it's going to take over.
And are you hopeful?
I just don't know. I'm agnostic.
You must get in bed at night, and when you're thinking to yourself about probabilities of outcomes, there must be a bias in one direction, because there certainly is for me. I mean, imagine everyone listening now has a internal prediction that they might not say out loud, but of how they think it's going to play out.
I really don't know. I genuinely don't know. I think it's incredibly uncertain. When I'm feeling slightly depressed, I think people are toast. The AI is going to take over. When I'm feeling cheerful, I think we'll figure out a way.
Maybe one of the facets of being a human is because we've always been here, like we were saying about our loved ones and our relationships, we assume casually that we will always be here and we'll always figure everything out. But there's a beginning and an end to everything, as we saw from the dinosaurs. I mean,
yeah. And we have to face the possibility that unless we do something soon, we're near the end.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question in their diary. And the question that they've left for you is, with everything that you see ahead of us, what is the biggest threat you see to human happiness?
I think the joblessness is a fairly urgent short-term threat to human happiness. I think if you make lots and lots of people unemployed, even if they get universal basic income, they're not going to be happy.
Because they need purpose.
Because they need purpose, yes.
And struggle.
They need to feel they're contributing something, they're useful.
And do you think that outcome, that there's going to be huge job displacement, is more probable than not?
Yes, I do.
And what sort of
that one I think is definitely more probable than not. If I worked in a call center, I'd be terrified.
And what's the time frame for that in terms of mass job
I think it's beginning to happen already. I read an article in The Atlantic recently that said it's already getting hard for university graduates to get jobs. And part of that may be that people are already using AI for the jobs they would have got.
I spoke to the CEO of a major company that everyone will know of, lots of people use, and he said to me in DMs that they used to have just over 7,000 employees. He said by last year they were down to, I think, 5,000. He said right now they have 3,600. And he said by the end of summer, because of AI agents, they'll be down to 3,000. So
it's happening already?
Yes. He's halved his workforce because AI agents can now handle 80% of the customer service inquiries and other things. So it's happening already.
Yeah.
So urgent action is needed.
Yep.
I don't know what that urgent action is.
That's a tricky one because that depends very much on the political system. And political systems are all going in the wrong direction at present.
I mean, what do we need to do? Save up money? Like, do we save money? Do we move to another part of the world?
I don't know.
What would you tell your kids to do? They said, Dad, like, there's going to be loads of job displacement.
Because I worked for Google for 10 years, they have enough money.
Okay, fuck.
So they're not typical.
What if they didn't have money?
Trained to be a plumber.
Really?
Yeah.
Bueno. ¿Qué cojones?
Geoffrey, thank you so much. You're the first Nobel Prize winner that I've ever had a conversation with, I think, in my life. So that's a tremendous honor. And you received that award for a lifetime of exceptional work in pushing the world forward in so many profound ways that will lead to great, and that have led to great advancements and things that matter so much to us. And now you've turned this season in your life to shining a light on some of your own work, but also on the broader risks of AI and how it might impact us adversely. And there's very few people that have worked inside the machine of a Google or a big tech company that have contributed to the field of AI that are now at the very forefront of warning us against the very thing that they worked upon.
There are actually a surprising number of us now.
They're not as public, and they're actually quite hard to get to have these kinds of conversations because many of them are still in that industry. So, someone who tries to contact these people often and invites them to have conversations, they often are a little bit hesitant to speak openly. So they speak privately, but they're less willing to openly because maybe they still have some sort of incentives at play.
I have an advantage over them, which is I'm older, so I'm unemployed, so I can say what I like.
Well, there you go. So thank you for doing what you do. It's a real honor, and please do continue to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
People think I'm joking when I say that, but I'm not.
Oh, the plumbing thing.
Yeah. And plumbers are pretty well paid.
Madre mía, para acabar. Los fontaneros están bastante bien pagados. Bueno, mucha audiencia hoy, ¿no? Mucha audiencia. A ver, vamos a ver los últimos comentarios. Lourdes, a los físicos les cuesta aceptar una realidad superior. No, a algunos físicos. Y son los físicos los que además nos demuestran y nos muestran el camino, en parte. No, si confianza, dice Raxo Anatniuk, pienso que deberíamos tener más confianza en la humanidad, ¿no? Si una cosa es, podemos tener toda. Seguro que sin currar habrá gente que haga tonterías, pero también puede haber gente que haga cosas positivas. Tienes que ver la realidad, lo que hay ahora. La gente que recibe ese tipo de ayudas, ¿qué hace? Sí, ha sido un programa excelente, sí, me pareció. Sabias palabras de Hinton, ¿a qué te refieres? Ha dicho lo del final, bueno, me ha emocionado un poco la parte humana de Hinton, ¿no? Sí, estoy con Antu ahí, que la parte humana de Hinton, que seguramente sea la de Illy ahora, ¿no? Pero mucho más joven. Bueno, ha dicho a la primera no la ha puesto muy bien, ¿no? 2 esposas fallecidas. No aprovechar la primavera de sus hijos. Le podría haber hecho esta pregunta, que si somos tan parecidos los modelos de IA y estamos buscando su alineación, ¿qué hay que alinear para que no decida lo que decidió él en su vida, ¿no? En el aspecto de pasar más tiempo con su esposa o darse cuenta de determinadas cosas afectivas o del sentido de la vida o pasar tiempo con sus hijos. ¿Qué deberíamos modificar o alinear o cómo en las IAs? Tanto que trabaja su hijo, entre comillas, Ilya Sutskever. Su propia trampa. Sí, yo también, Javier Martín Rodríguez, estoy de acuerdo de que el problema de la sustitución del trabajo es la pérdida del propósito, sí. Y que es muy rápido. A ver, el ser humano es adaptativo, pero es que el problema no es de adaptación, es que es profundo. Pues no creo que ser conserje o guardia de seguridad o reponedor en una super sea un propósito para la vida. Yo ahí eso también te lo compro. Yo, a ver, mi familia, bueno, siempre pongo en el caso de mi madre, que ha sido panadera toda la vida, bueno, pues una profesión muy digna, pero entiendo que en una fase de la humanidad evolucionada, este tipo de profesiones para mí son inhumanas. Tal cantidad de horas y ese tipo de trabajo. Épico lo de Fontanero. Esto voy a hacer, bueno, no voy a hacer muy largo los análisis, no voy a hacer análisis final, yo creo que ha estado bastante bien y se ha entendido todo bien. Y además, como tengo que acabar de leer el PDF para el debate de esta tarde a las 7:30, pero bueno, esto de épico lo del fontanero supera a lo de la pala. Y luego, cuidado, lo que dice luego detrás de cámara, que lo iba a quitar, el backstage, oye, que lo del fontanero no está tan mal y que le pagan muy bien. Tócate los cojones, dicho por un premio Nobel. No, y claro, como mis hijos tienen dinero, a ver, yo, ¿qué queréis que os diga? No. Como ser humano me deja un poco de desear, me da un poco de penilla, ¿eh? Pero sí, estoy con Eduardo César Garrido, que si no pasa nada lo tendremos el lunes, hablando de uno de sus papers. Épico lo del fontanero, totalmente. Voy a hacer el mono fontanero. No, Colkane. Le hubiera ido mejor a él y quizá a todos si hubiera cogido la pala. No, le agradeceremos siempre su aportación y su conocimiento. No, eso no estoy de acuerdo. Me ha hecho gracia, eso sí. Lourdes, claro, aquí está en juego la concepción individual de la vida, de la existencia y la realidad mental que proyecta su comprensión. Sí, a la cosmovisión. ¿Y cuál vamos a proyectar para la mayoría? ¿O cuál vamos a vender? ¿O predicar? ¿O evangelizar? Eso está muy bien dicho, Colkin. Quizás ese es el propósito de la vida, disfrutar la realidad. Bueno, disfrutar y crear la realidad. Lo que estamos haciendo no está mal, pero hay que disfrutarla. Junto a tus seres queridos, junto a... Bueno, contigo mismo lo primero, es decir, no necesitar a nadie, eso es muy importante y es un consejo que os doy. Quererse uno y luego querer a los demás. Yo creo que no puedes querer a nadie si no te quieres tú. Alberto de Cenio, son buenos sus comentarios. Dice, una plaga de fontaneros, no habrá ni una gotera. Hostia, tío. Tengo que lavarme la cara. Después de lo del fontanero, estoy con Eduardo César Garrido. Ha sido épico este. Y acordaos de lo del final, ¿eh? Oye, que está muy bien pagado. Y bueno, dejo esto con el comentario de Javier. Bueno, no, ha habido uno más. Venga, va. Dice, ¿cómo se nota que no ha trabajado desatascando bajantes de aguas residuales? Ya, pero que bueno, supongo que fontaneros. Yo, de todo manual, no tengo ni puta idea, ¿vale? Tengo un amigo que es uno de mis mejores amigos que es al revés. Es el manitas que sabe hacerlo todo. A ver, esto que dice JMM. Pues el emergentismo implica por lo menos un dualismo de propiedades. ¿Qué quieres decir con eso? JMM, no lo acabo de pillar. Bueno, lo intuyo, pero si me lo explicas. P. Petrel 82. A ver, venga, voy a poner todo lo que digáis. A ver, cuidado con lo que ponéis. A mí me preocupa la pobreza y el hambre a que haya gente que quiere trabajar, ganar más dinero, encuentre trabajo. Sí, el tema de las desigualdades es fundamental. Es decir, he dicho una cosa que es que la calidad de una civilización debe ser el que la diferencia entre el más pobre y el más rico sea mínima. Eso es un factor que yo creo que, no sé si lo he dicho bien, yo creo que sí. Yo creo que todos lo firmaríamos, ¿no? Quizá no podamos abolir la pobreza o que haya una élite, pero una sociedad menos desigual, ¿no? Que no haya desigualdades o el mínimo posible, vamos, o luchar contra ellas. J. Dice, yo apoyo el basilisco de Rocco, qué bueno. Tenemos que hacer un programa de verano del basilisco de Rocco. Uno de Philip K. Dick y otro... Bueno, el basilisco de Rocco tiene tela, ¿eh? Bueno, el puro que le echa Yudkowsky al usuario es de órdago. Bueno, el programa de basilisco de Rocco lo tenemos que hacer este verano. Muy bueno, JL. Bueno, vamos con Eduardo. No creo. Bajo un punto de vista funcionalista, el cerebro podría hacer emerger conciencia sin necesidad de recurrir al dualismo. Ojo, yo me considero dualista de sentencia. Bueno, eso es un debate profundo. Bueno, yo creo que ha estado muy bien. La portada también, no me digáis que no mola. Ha sido un programa interesante. Yo no quería... Es verdad que me ha gustado. Me ha gustado porque aunque es... Bueno, no ha dicho muchas cosas nuevas, pero sí que han habido matices en el tema personal, en el tema de las creencias. Se ha visto un Hinton en 1 hora y media. Está muy bien. Es una charla que está bien, que dura lo que tiene que durar. Nosotros le hemos dado también nuestras pinceladas, la hemos visto juntos con nuestro chat. Ha habido mucha audiencia. Tenéis un montón de programas en el canal y esta tarde tenéis un nuevo programa analizando un documento de las Naciones Unidas, Proyecto Evolución Humana, creo que se llama. Así que os espero a todos a las 7:30. Un abrazo por estar apoyándonos siempre y seguirnos. Y hasta la próxima. Bueno, hasta esta tarde. Me voy a la